Chapter 481. Xiaoyi was shocked. This was too shameless. Lu Zishi smiled coldly. Since you like me, don't even think about regretting it. Xiaoyi cursed. This was simply the logic of a bandit. Lu Zishi pressed the button and hung up. He coldly glanced at the phone, then turned around and saw Wei Wei Bai at the bedroom door, looking at him with a sheet draped over her. In the light, her snow-white skin and red lips carried traces of immaturity, but he could already see the stunning shadow of her future. Lu Zishi's breath caught as he thought of what he had just said. He didn't know how much she had heard. Wei Wei Bai laughed. If I regret it, are you really going to die? Lu Zishi stared at her with dark eyes. He stretched out his long legs and walked to her side. Then he extended his fingers and gently lifted her chin, carelessly rubbing her skin. As he wished, he saw her face turn red. He said in a low voice, I'm going to drag you down with me. Wei Wei Bai, Lu Zishi chuckled. You really believed it. How could I bear to let you die, fool? Then, without waiting for her to reply, he lowered his head and kissed her. He didn't want to think about the future. What if she regretted it? Just thinking about it made his heart feel like it was being cut by a knife. This was the first time he hated the fact that they were siblings. Dreamlike Blossom's final scene. It was completed in the palace of the film city. Wei Wei Bai closed the script. It was super melodramatic. She didn't have the face to act. It was even more melodramatic than her. Xiao Yi picked up the loudspeaker and sat in the director's chair. Everyone in position. Are the actors ready? Start shooting. Lu Zishi was going to act. He could finally sit in the director's chair. And Chen walked out in his costume. When he saw Wei Wei Bai in person, he breathed a sigh of relief. He finally didn't have to act in front of a green screen. Was there such a miserable supporting male lead? From beginning to end, he couldn't see the male and female leads. The scenes were all done by him talking to himself and then editing. Wei Wei Bai walked out wearing a white shirt and a red dress. Her lively and beautiful appearance stunned everyone present. She turned her head and saw Lu Zishi in his full suit of general's armor. He was handsome, as if he had walked out of a painting. His eyes were incomparably cold. But when he saw Wei Wei Bai, his expression softened. Xiao Yi looked at this pair of golden boy and girl, brother and sister. He couldn't help but rub his face helplessly. The sour smell of love was too obvious. Couldn't he restrain himself a little? Xiao Yi raised the loudspeaker and roared, "Begin." Wei Wei Bai was the first to enter the zone. The smile in her eyes vanished. Her figure was like a willow leaf, sharp as a knife, as she threw herself into Lu Zishi's arms. "Brother." Her voice was resolute and desperate. "Please take me away." This plot was Yan Yi forcing her to abdicate, but Yan Qiqi had had enough of the life in the palace and all sorts of schemes and ambitions. All she wanted was to get out of the palace. She wanted to live in seclusion with her brother. But Yan Yi couldn't bear to part with his power. He hugged her, a look of struggle flashing through his eyes. "In the end," he said, "when I ascend the throne, you will be my." His tone was affectionate and gentle. But he didn't finish his words. Wei Wei Bai looked at him in despair. In the end, she just smiled. And Qian suddenly sneered. "Yan Yi, do you think you can succeed? The throne is Zhen's, and so is she. What right do you have to fight?" Lu Zishi's eyes turned cold as he glared fiercely at Qian. At this moment, the murderous look in the film emperor's eyes made Qian's pitiful self shrink back a little. Lu Zishi gritted his teeth and said word by word, "She is mine." To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 482. And Qian, is there such a line? I can't remember at the moment. Forget it, I'll continue acting. He sneered, "You've already fallen into my trap. Kill him for me." As soon as this line came out, a prepared arrow flew out. Wei Wei Bai's expression changed, and she pushed Lu Zishi away without hesitation. The arrow pierced her chest, breaking the blood bag and causing blood to gush out of her white blouse. Her face was deathly pale, and the sharp pain caused her to tremble as she collapsed. Blood stained her body. Lu Zishi rushed over and hugged her. He hardly needed to act. He just saw her like this. Even if it was a pretense. He was also afraid and grieved. Wei Wei Bai's eyes overflowed with deep affection and sorrow. Brother, Lu Zishi looked at her in fear and gripped her hand tightly. His eyes were full of helplessness. You'll be fine. Bai Weiwei sighed softly with pity. It seemed real but also seemed fake. Forget about me. I'm leaving. Lu Zishi's heart seemed to be twisted. He stared blankly at Weiwei Bai. She softly recited her lines, I'm willing to die for you, brother. Lu Zishi was almost shaken by the true emotion in her eyes. It was clearly a play, but there was no trace of acting. It was as if she was really willing to die for him. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 98. The final scene smoothly ended. Before the celebration party started, Lu Zishi received a call from his team. After he finished listening, his expression changed. Wei Wei Bai took off her costume and makeup. When she walked out, she saw Lu Zishi talking on the phone. His tone was somewhat angry. When she walked over, Lu Zishi turned his head warily and immediately hung up. What's wrong, brother? Lu Zishi revealed a reassuring smile. It's nothing. It's a company matter. Let's go. Wei Wei Bai took his hand and smiled. Okay. After returning home, they ate and took a shower. Then, they played Wei Wei Bai's favorite games together. At around 10 o'clock, Wei Wei Bai went to bed. Only then did Lu Zishi dare to turn on the computer. Sure enough, the internet had already exploded. Even the crew of Flower Blossom had been brushed aside. The top trending searches were all about him and Bai Weiwei's sibling relationship. Originally, after a few days of rapid deletion, whitewashing and changing the target, they were about to completely clear Wei Wei Bai's name. In the end, it turned out that he and Wei Wei Bai were biological siblings. Everything was exposed. The paternity test, the birth certificate, and the matter between his father and Bai Ziwen. All of them appeared on Weibo, Tieba, and forums. This could no longer be suppressed. Moreover, there was a complete set of dried goods, so there was no way to wash them. Lu Zishi almost wanted to smash his computer. This was not the most serious matter. He didn't dare to let Wei Wei Bai see this. It was their love affair that was exposed. One of them was the Weibo of a cute girl from a dessert shop. He posted several photos. It was a rainy day. He went to buy desserts, and they were filmed kissing in the rain. He was also careless. He had always thought that he could hide their relationship. So he didn't hide it. The angles of several photos were clear. The romantic rain, the light-colored umbrella. He smiled and gently lowered his head to kiss her. This photo was so beautiful that it exploded on Weibo. There was also a creepy title. The most disgusting thing of the year. Genius movie Emperor Lu Zishi actually committed incest with his biological sister. Usually, even a small matter in the entertainment industry could cause an uproar. Not to mention such an iconic incident. It was simply setting off earth-shattering waves. Chapter 483. Even his fans reacted strongly, with a lot of condemnation. Incest. This was the original sin. No one could wash away their innocence. Lu Zishi stretched out his hands and crossed his fingers. He tiredly rested his chin on the back of his hand. He definitely couldn't let her see this. Lu Zishi stared fiercely at the information that had been exposed. Who was it that exposed the fact that they were siblings? He called people to investigate, and the company was in chaos. Because the public relations department's phone had been blown up with calls. They were all denouncing Lu Zishi and Wei Wei Bai's love affair. The entertainment industry was like a double-edged sword. When he was famous, he was glamorous and surrounded by tens of thousands of people. When something happened, there was nowhere to run. It was like a carnival, and people couldn't wait to trample him into the ground. Lu Zishi wasn't afraid of being spurned. But what about Wei Wei Bai? She was only 18 years old, an age when she should be pampered. Moreover, her talent. Lu Zishi felt that she was the same as him, a talented actress. The kind of actress who would shine in the entertainment industry in the future. After this incident, her dreams were ruined. The fear in Lu Zishi's heart finally came true. Would she regret it? When their love was spurned by tens of thousands of people, would she still be able to insist on liking him? Lu Zishi turned off the computer, got into bed, and reached out to hold her in his arms. Wei Weibai called out in a daze, "Brother?" Lu Zishi's voice trembled slightly. "I'm here. Go to sleep." Wei Weibai nodded blankly, then obediently nestled in his arms and fell asleep. Lu Zishi didn't sleep all night. He held her, not daring to let go. He was worried that when he woke up, she would leave him. Lu Zishi disconnected all the internet cables in the house. He lied to Wei Weibai, saying that there was a problem with the broadband in this area and that there was no way to go online. Then, the servants at home warned her. She wasn't allowed to go out, nor was she allowed to tell her what was going on outside. He could hide it for as long as he could. Lu Zishi received a call with the results of the investigation. His expression was calm, but his eyes were cold. He saw Wei Weibai lying on the sofa, reading a book. "Wei Wei, I'm going out for a while. I'll be back soon." Wei Weibai was reading a novel happily. Her slender white legs stretched out from under her long shirt, and her feet swayed in the air. "Yes, bring me desserts." Lu Zishi smiled dotingly. "Okay." Xiao Yi hurried over. He was about to go crazy. After this incident, Feng Huaxian could only be temporarily suspended. Right now, Lu Zishi and Wei Weibai were all over the internet. Everyone condemned him. It was extremely crazy. Xiao Yi was worried that Lu Zishi would be beaten to death on the streets. Who asked him to be so famous? This time, he had committed incest with his own sister. It was like setting off a bomb. In particular, it was even scarier when some fans turned against them. They arrived at the agreed coffee shop. This place had long been booked and cleared out, so it was completely empty. Only Lu Zishi was sitting by the window, drinking coffee. His movements were elegant, and his delicate features were ice-cold. Handsome and cold, it made people's hearts tremble. Xiao Yi sighed. "There's no way to clean up this mess. You should pack up and take your sister abroad to avoid the limelight." Lu Zishi was expressionless, without a trace of panic. "Let's settle our personal grudges first." "Xiao Yi, what grudges?" Just as he said this, the door to the coffee shop opened. Several bodyguards dragged Bai Ziwen in. Bai Ziwen's face was frightened. Her hair was disheveled, and she looked like a stray dog. When Lu Zishi saw her, his eyes flashed with disgust. "Was it you who exposed that Wei Wei and I are biological siblings?" After Bai Ziwen exposed it, she went to hide from gambling debts. For a moment, she didn't know that she had poked a hornet's nest. She thought that Lu Zishi was angry because she forced him to acknowledge Wei Weibai. She immediately pretended to be calm. "Wei Wei is your biological sister. Even if you hate Auntie, you can't deny this matter." Lu Zishi looked indifferently at the coffee in his hand. Bai Ziwen became agitated. "Wei Wei is your sister. Now everyone knows. If you don't acknowledge it, you're heartless and unjust." Lu Zishi suddenly sneered, and his smile twisted. He gritted his teeth and said, "So what if we're biological siblings? You're all rushing to force me." "Bai Ziwen, you're biological to begin with." Lu Zishi suddenly got up and smashed the coffee cup in his hand on her head. Chapter 484. Bai Ziwen screamed as her head bled. Lu Zishi's eyes were filled with ruthlessness as he kicked her away. Bai Ziwen's face was covered in blood as she knocked over a table and chair. She looked at Lu Zishi in horror. Lu Zishi's face was filled with rage. He grabbed her hair and slammed her to the ground. Xiao Yi was scared silly. He immediately stood up and stretched out his hand to grab his arm. Brother Lu, calm down. You're going to kill her." Lu Zishi was expressionless as he lifted his foot and stomped on Bai Ziwen's hand. Bai Ziwen screamed and rolled on the ground. Xiao Yi felt his legs go soft. He always knew that Lu Zishi had a bad temper. The movie Emperor's elegant persona was for his fans to see. But he didn't expect him to be so savage. Lu Zishi's face was gloomy. He ignored Xiao Yi and leisurely used his shoe to crush Bai Ziwen's fingers. People said that the 10 fingers were connected to the heart. Stepping on them one by one was painful enough to make one's scalp numb. Xiao Yi was so scared that his voice trembled. You're still in the limelight. Don't cause any more trouble, Zishi. Lu Zishi said sinisterly, let go. Xiao Yi's hand trembled. Under his cold and gloomy gaze, he obediently let go and then obediently shrank to the side. It wasn't that he didn't want to save her. It was that Uncle Lu's eyes were so frightening, so frightening. He was so scared that his little heart was about to split open. Lu Zishi absent-mindedly straightened his cuffs. Then, he faced Bai Ziwen, who had been beaten to a pulp. He said maliciously, Who are you calling my sister? Bai Ziwen's head spun as she looked at the terror-like Lu Zishi in horror. She said fearfully, Weiwei's. Lu Zishi kicked her in the stomach. Keep talking. Who are you calling my sister? The ruthlessness in his heart was completely aroused. He wasn't afraid of being spurned. He wasn't afraid of losing his movie emperor status, nor was he afraid of losing fans. What he was afraid of was that Wei Bai would leave him. This was something that was loathed and crazily condemned by the entire society. He couldn't imagine if she would regret being with this beast of a brother. She would regret it. If he didn't regret it for a day or a month, then what about a year or a decade? At that time, she would definitely leave him. This was the most fatal blow to Lu Zishi. Therefore, when he found out that Bai Ziwen was the one who exposed their relationship, both new and old grudges arose. Lu Zishi wished he could cut this woman into 1,000 pieces. Bai Ziwen was truly terrified. She hugged her head and cried, Don't kill me. I only wanted Wei to return to the Lu family. She felt that Lu Zishi should know that Wei Bai wasn't his biological sister. That was why he had tortured and beaten her. Lu Zishi picked up a chair and was just about to smash it down. Bai Ziwen finally screamed out, She's not your sister. I was wrong. I shouldn't have let her go. I shouldn't have lied to you. The chair stopped in midair. Bai Ziwen was so scared that she was in tears. I had no choice. At that time, Wei was dead. I was very afraid that your family would beat me to death, so I went to the orphanage to adopt one. Lu Zishi stared at her blankly. He couldn't seem to understand her words. Bai Ziwen lay on the ground in a sorry state. She didn't dare to raise her head as she begged for mercy. I was wrong. I shouldn't have adopted a child and said that she was your biological sister. I shouldn't have forged a fake report. I just wanted to get a share of the property. She was frightened. Lu Zishi was like a demon. She was afraid that if she didn't admit it, she would be beaten to death. The chair in Lu Zishi's hand fell to the ground. The ferocious violence on his face disappeared and was replaced by disbelief. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 485. She wasn't his sister? He closed his eyes and endured the billowing waves in his heart, then expressionlessly combed his messy hair back. Then he crouched down and asked coldly, You said Wei isn't my sister? Bai Ziwen cried, Didn't you already know? Otherwise, why did you hit me like this? He hit her because he thought Wei Bai was his sister. Lu Zishi's fingers trembled, and he clenched them tightly. Tell me clearly, you adopted Wei from that orphanage. Just as Lu Zishi was interrogating Bai Ziwen, Wei Bai suddenly heard the system's warning. Countdown to failure of the side quest. Please complete the mission of 100 favorability within 30 minutes. If you exceed 30 minutes, the host will run naked around the Earth's equator. This time, the warning was sharp and terrifying. This was Wei Bai's first time facing failure of a side quest. She rolled off the sofa and onto the floor. How can the side quest fail? Bai Ziwen kept the secret very well. Even this fake daughter of hers didn't know that she wasn't her biological daughter. And because of Bai Ziwen's huge gambling debt, it was even more impossible for her to reveal this secret. This made Wei Bai feel very relieved about the side quest. So she put all her energy into the main quest. The system said, the male lead beat your mother up, and she confessed. Wei Bai said, Your mother is the one. Where's Lu Zishi? We need to do a big one. If the favorability doesn't reach 100 in half an hour. The system was excited. Do you want to run naked around the equator? Wei Bai, Was Slagstem's tone gloating? To us. The system pulled up Lu Zixi's location. She immediately called a reporter and posted online. His location was exposed. The system looked at her familiar appearance. Sure enough, after doing so many bad things, she was nimble in doing things. Then Wei Wei Bai rushed desperately to the coffee shop. Why did you call so many people over? Wei Wei Bai, the more people there are, the merrier. If he scolds us again, I will throw myself at him and say that I won't leave him even if I die. Alright, I got 100 favorable impression points. Lu Zixi's favorability was still at 98. Wasn't it just a bit of insecurity that was causing trouble? The system said, you're getting more and more familiar with the routine. Wei Wei Bai said, if you had transmigrated 10 times, you would have turned from a newbie to a veteran. After that, I adopted her from that orphanage. What I said was the truth. I just wanted a share of the inheritance. Bai Ziwen's face was bruised and swollen. She cried miserably. How could she have imagined that Lu Zixi would be so terrifying? Not only did he not recognize her as his sister, he even beat her to death. Lu Zixi looked at her, his eyes cold. Property? Do you know how much I hate you? I didn't kill you because I didn't want to dirty my hands, yet you still dare to appear in front of me. Bai Ziwen trembled all over, not daring to make a sound. Lu Zixi, does Wei Wei know about this? Bai Ziwen's mind was in a mess. She was afraid of being beaten to death by him, so she said whatever was on her mind. I don't know. If she knew that she wasn't my biological child, she wouldn't be filial to me. Lu Zixi looked at her coldly, then suddenly sneered. Adopting her was perhaps the most correct thing you've ever done. If it wasn't for Bai Ziwen's adoption, he probably would never have met Wei Wei Bai. All kinds of violent emotions were fluctuating in Lu Zixi's chest. But in the end, these emotions only had one impulse. He wanted to go back. He wanted to tell Wei Wei that they weren't biological siblings, and that they could be together. Chapter 486. Xiao Yi, who was watching from the sidelines, was completely stunned. Even watching a melodramatic TV series couldn't compare to reality. Lu Zixi reached out, picked up the jacket on the back of the chair, and put it on. Then he said to the bodyguard, take her away. Throw her into the company's warehouse and lock her up. Wait until he thoroughly investigated the matter of Wei Wei in the orphanage. Only then could he release Bai Ziwen. In the end, she was someone who had raised Wei Wei, so Lu Zixi didn't have the heart to kill her. The bodyguard immediately dragged her away. Lu Zixi looked back at Xiao Yi. You're in charge of guiding public opinion on the internet. Say that Bai Ziwen, this woman, is lying for money. The fact that Wei Wei and I aren't blood-related siblings has to be spread as soon as possible. At this point, Bai Ziwen couldn't possibly lie to him. After all, this lie wouldn't do her any good. Xiao Yi immediately nodded and was about to say something. Suddenly, the glass window was shattered by a stone. The stone hit Lu Zixi's feet, shattering the glass all over the floor. Xiao Yi cursed and raised his head to look. Outside the coffee shop, a large number of fans and reporters had run over. Some were heckling, some were cursing. It was bustling. Lu Zixi frowned. The bodyguards had already left. He took out his cell phone and made a call, asking the company to send a few more bodyguards. As a result, just as he finished the call, he saw a familiar petite figure in the crowd, struggling to approach the coffee shop. She wore a mask and had her hair tied up in a bun. Standing in the crowd, her face couldn't be seen, but she was conspicuous and cute. Lu Zixi's pupils constricted, and his heart jumped. He immediately recognized that this was Wei Wei Bai. The fans who came, as well as the reporters, were all potential violent elements. If they found out that she was Wei Wei Bai, then the situation would get out of hand, and she might be hurt. Lu Zixi, are you really having incest with your sister? The reporters shouted desperately. The door to the coffee shop was locked, so they could only push and shove desperately outside. This was the biggest news of the year. If anyone could interview Lu Zixi, even if it was just a photo, it was a good opportunity for the reporters to get a bonus. The fans weren't so rational. They screamed, Lu Zixi, how can you be with your own sister? It's too disgusting. Get out of the entertainment industry. People like you should go to jail, and your sister isn't a good person either. Wei Weibai was about to go deaf. She glanced at the time. There were less than 5 minutes left. Was she really going to run around the world naked? That scene was so beautiful that she didn't dare to imagine it. Wei Weibai looked at the coffee shop's broken window. Lu Zishi stood by the window, his posture tall and straight like a pine tree. His delicate features were full of worry. He saw her. Wei Weibai was just about to say hello when her mask was pushed off by someone. Her pretty little face was exposed under the sunlight. Her watery eyes were sparkling, and her skin was soft and delicate. She carried a hint of ignorance. She was ridiculously beautiful. Such a person would be easily distinguished in a crowd of demons and devils. Lu Zishi's breathing stopped. His eyes were red, and fear made him unable to think. Xiaoyi was just about to say something. But Lu Zishi had already rushed to the door. Without hesitation, he pulled it open and rushed out. On the other side, some fans had already recognized Wei Weibai. Isn't that Wei Weibai? Is that the sister who committed incest with her own brother? How can she still have the face to come out? I thought she was just using the unspoken rules to climb up. I didn't expect her to be so disgusting. She hooked up with her own brother. Wei Weibai looked at them blankly. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 487. Several hands fiercely shoved her away. Someone madly said to her, "Why don't you go die? How can you seduce your brother? He's my idol." One person made a move. The remaining emotional fans began to panic. Wei Weibai's lips moved. She looked at them, petite and helpless. In the frenzied crowd, she was pitifully alone. An agitated fan picked up a shoe and viciously smashed it at Wei Weibai. A hand suddenly reached out from the crowd and hugged Wei Weibai, completely protecting her in its embrace. The shoe was also opened. Wei Weibai was hidden in a warm and broad embrace. She raised her head, only to see the panting Lu Zishi. His handsome face was filled with cold anger. Lu Zishi's arms tightly held Wei Weibai. The veins on the back of his hands were protruding, and his eyes held a desperate madness. Wei Weibai grabbed the clothes on his chest, her eyes somewhat flustered. She whispered, "I saw it. Our relationship was exposed on the internet." Lu Zishi's whole body stiffened. The joy in his heart from knowing that they weren't biological siblings had yet to fade. But another kind of longing emerged. Would she regret it? Everyone was cursing them. These malicious comments and the pressure of the entire society. Would she want to separate from him? The words, "not biological siblings," were in his mouth, but he couldn't say them out loud. Wei Weibai took a deep breath and was about to say something. Suddenly, she heard the system's warning. The male lead is in danger. There's a crazy fan on the left, stabbing with a knife. Stabbing from this direction. Stabbing the kidneys. Was this to prevent Lu Zishi from being impotent and incest? What a loyal fan who put in so much effort. Wei Weibai blinked and fiercely pushed Lu Zishi away with her fingers. Lu Zishi thought she didn't want him. He looked at her somewhat blankly and sadly. Did she really regret liking him? After Wei Weibai pushed him away, the knife happened to pierce her body. Because of the angle and because there were too many people. For a moment, Lu Zishi didn't see the knife. He only saw Wei Weibai's body suddenly fall. He didn't have time to be sad. He knocked aside a few people and reached out to grab her. Wei Weibai took the opportunity to hug him. She buried her head in his chest and suddenly said in a voice as tender as water, "Lu Zishi, I like you." Lu Zishi paused, his eyes somewhat moist. He had experienced so many malicious attacks. She was still willing to like him. He was so moved that he couldn't speak. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 99. There was only 1 minute left. Wei Weibai smiled and blushed shyly. "Can you kiss me?" In front of a crowd. In the crowd of people who were fiercely condemning them for being shameless and disgusting. Wei Weibai's voice was like clear spring water, flowing into his heart. Lu Zishi also smiled. He lowered his head and gently kissed her. At this moment, under the sun, they were so perfect that people couldn't help but hold their breath. No matter how difficult the road ahead was, they seemed to be fearless. I love you. Lu Zishi left her lips. There wasn't a trace of gloom in his eyes, only warm affection. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 100. The side quest has been resolved within 30 minutes. Punishment has been cancelled. The host is facing a major life threat and will leave the plane ahead of time. Countdown of 5 seconds. Uebai's eyes were smiling, and her voice was weak. I love you too. Then she slowly closed her eyes and listened to the last second of the countdown. The familiar darkness enveloped her. And Lu Zishi finally realized that something was wrong. His hand was wet. He raised it and it was covered in blood. Lu Zishi stared blankly at the blood in his hand. He lowered his head and saw Wei Bai nestled in his arms. She was soft and calm, as if she was asleep. Address of the full text: https://www. Sashu. Com download of the full text: https://www. Sashu. Com read of the full text: https://m Sashu. Com // Chapter 488. Wei Bai was short of breath. She struggled to say, Tongzi, am I back? The system said, you are back, but you didn't succeed in running naked. Wei Bai, what's with the pity in your tone? Do you want me to run naked? A familiar notification sounded. Host's mission is complete. 30 days of life gained, a total of 112 days. Wei Bai was excited. She could live for a long time. Ding, deducting 5 days of life subsistence allowance, 15 days of a commoner's meal in the system cafeteria, 1 day of beauty capsule, 3 days of data fabrication device, 10 days of discounted system chocolate, 3 days of painkillers before death, 10 days of bullet screen maintenance fee. Wei Bai, the system said, let me calculate with the calculator. Congratulations, host. After deducting 47 days, you have 65 days of life left. Wei Bai felt like she was going to have a heart attack again. She worked so hard in this plane, but the result was not enough. Just the system alone was a wastrel. Eating a snack cost 25 days of her life. The system seemed to know what she was thinking. You said I could eat. Wei Bai's face was ferocious. Where's the chocolate? The system said flatteringly, I saw the discount. Usually, a bucket of 100 life points, it's only 10 days of expiration. Wei spat out a mouthful of old blood. The system was happy. I ate as much as I could and finally finished it in this plane before the expiration date. I'm awesome, aren't I? Wei Bai did not want to talk. She wanted to throw a bomb at the system. How much money did she have to earn to feed this trash system that only knew how to eat? Wei Bai's voice trembled. Where's Yiyuxuan? Where's my Yiyuxuan? The system said, Yiyuxuan? Wei Bai's eyes were filled with tears. He's my life. My life depends on him. He's my tycoon, my golden thigh, my lifelong pursuit. I suddenly realized that I've fallen in love with him. Winning over anyone was better than winning over Yiyuxuan. Every day, the host would refresh the threshold for being shameless. In the corridor of the hospital, by Changyan side. Mr. Yi, I think it's better to cancel this marriage. Our Bai family is trying to climb too high with you. Yiyuxuan stood quietly by the wall with one hand in his pocket. He was wearing a clean white shirt and simple suit pants. He looked fresh and handsome. His expression was indifferent and his eyes were calm. When he looked at Bai Changyan, there was not a trace of emotion in his eyes. Bai Changyan revealed a tired expression. My daughter's body isn't good either. I suddenly feel that she's not suitable to enter a wealthy family. Yiyuxuan looked at Bai Changyan coldly. His entire body was icy cold. Bai Changyan tried his best to say, how about I introduce a few girls who are better than my Wei? Yiyuxuan glanced at him coldly and finally opened his mouth. No one is better than her. Bai Changyan asked, how do you know there isn't? Yi Yuxuan lowered his head and his eyes flashed scarlet. If I say there isn't, then there isn't. No one can compare to a single strand of her hair. The cold air was filled with ruthlessness. It was a little strange. Bai Changyan was stunned for a moment. Why did he feel that Yi Yuxuan's mood was not right? Qin Qiu, who had been observing from the side, also noticed that Yi Yuxuan's mood was a little out of control. He immediately came over and grabbed Yi Yuxuan's arm. He smiled and said, "In-law, let's talk about marriage later. Wei Wei hasn't woken up yet. It's most important to treat her first." As soon as this sentence came out, Bai Changyan felt sad. Yes, his daughter's life was still unknown. Chapter 489. What was he saying to Yuxuan, this shameless beast? The most important thing was that his daughter woke up. Qin Qiu laughed as he pulled Yi Yuxuan away. When they finally reached his office, he frowned and said, "After sleeping, you're not in a good mood." Yi Yuxuan didn't say anything. He went to the table and opened the drawer. He took out a cigarette box and a lighter. Then he elegantly and neatly put the cigarette between his lips and lit it. Qin Qiu was surprised. "When did you start smoking?" Yi Yuxuan didn't smoke at all. She hadn't smoked since she was a child. Yi Yuxuan held the cigarette between her fingers and glanced at him lightly. "In my dream." "Qin Qiu, in your dream?" Yi Yuxuan looked down at the cigarette and suddenly looked disappointed. "In my dream, she left me again." The movie and television tycoon's national sister, follow-up, Lu Zixi incest scandal continued to ferment. From the film Emperor's incest with his sister to Wei Wei Bai's death and the fact that they weren't siblings, it only took 3 days. Wei Wei Bai was an orphan and was adopted by Bai Ziwen. But she wasn't Lu Renjia's daughter. She had no blood relationship with Lu Zixi. In the article refuting the rumor, Wei Wei Bai's information in the orphanage was included. Bai Ziwen's fake paternity test was also published. There was also Wei Wei Bai and Lu Zixi's paternity test report, which also proved that they weren't biological siblings. The mighty public condemnation. Suddenly, silence fell. Bai Ziwen also held a press conference. At the press conference, she cried miserably. "My brain was covered in lard. Because of gambling debts, I wanted to blackmail the Lu family." All the reporters were in an uproar. Bai Ziwen, "I didn't expect that Lu Zixi wouldn't give me money at all, so I was angry and forged those things. In fact, they weren't siblings at all." There were fans at the press conference. These fans were immediately angry. They threw water bottles, umbrellas, and even chairs at Bai Ziwen. Bai Ziwen was sent to the hospital again. When Xiao Yi called Lu Zixi was silent for a long time before he said gloomily, "She's no longer of any value." Xiao Yi's entire body trembled. "Don't tell me, don't do anything stupid." Lu Zixi didn't say anything and directly hung up. Within a few days, Bai Ziwen died in the hospital due to an infected wound. She had died in a hurry, and no one had come to identify her body, so she had been taken to the funeral parlor to be cremated. After Xiao Yi found out, he felt that it was definitely Lu Zixi's doing. On the internet, the incest rumors were cleared up. News of Wei Wei Bai's death also spread. Because a fan couldn't stand the scandals of her idol's incest and felt deceived, she planned to assassinate Lu Zixi. However, Wei Wei Bai managed to block the attack. Wei Wei Bai died on the same day. A fan at the scene even posted a video of that day. In the crowd of crazy condemnation. When the knife came, Wei Wei Bai didn't hesitate to push Lu Zixi away. This scene shocked many people. How deep of a love did one have to be to not hesitate to use one's own life to save one's loved one? Many fans, as well as those who cursed Wei Wei Bai online, cried. All sorts of apologies were posted on Weibo. It was lively for quite a while. The name Bai Wei Wei, when she was alive, was only a small hit because of an advertisement and the unspoken rules of black material. But after her death, it became completely popular. We owe Wei Wei Bai a life. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 490. This sentence was spread all over the internet. Rumors killed people, killing the most innocent girl. And it was a girl who deeply loved their film emperor. There were even some extreme fans who said, "Love to this extent, even if they were biological siblings, I can't afford to slander such a sister. To block a knife and die for the sake of loving someone. This kind of love was simply too pure to not be shaken." This Weibo post had a terrifying number of reposts. Gradually, someone began to call Wei Wei Bai little sister. It was like an apologetic memorial. Because they mistook her for Lu Zixi sister, they madly spat and cursed her. Later, the misunderstanding was cleared up. But she was long gone. The word little sister was like a memorial to an innocent girl. They were also apologizing for that innocent death. And what pushed this matter to a climax was Dreamlike Blossoms was released. This was Wei Wei Bai's debut work, and also her last posthumous work. The Dreamlike Blossoms crew didn't excessively celebrate Wei Wei Bai's death. They simply wrote the three names Lu Zixi, Wei Wei Bai, and Enchanting on the poster. Wei Wei Bai was in the middle. Many people went to see the movie out of guilt. There were even people on Weibo who said, "Although I don't look forward to little sister Wei Wei's acting skills, I know that we all owe her this movie ticket." This Weibo post quickly became a hot search. Everyone liked it one after another. The movie started with a big scene. Lu Zixi was dressed in martial attire, looking valiant and formidable, looking back with cold eyes. And Qian was also remarkable. She played a scheming emperor with a thin, weak, and pale appearance. And when Wei Wei Bai appeared, it was a pair of hands, slender and pale fingers, pink and tender like peach blossoms. The hands gently pushed open the window full of sunlight. Then came a light shirt with wide sleeves, cute double hair buns, and a beautiful, thin back. Someone called out Chi-Chi. She turned her head lightly, her almond-shaped eyes crystal clear. Her fair and delicate skin was flawless under the sun. Suddenly, her lips curved slightly. His eyes were filled with sunshine, and his smile was as pure and beautiful as a child's. This smile was so cute that it melted everyone. Those who thought she didn't know how to act were shocked. The movie lasted for nearly 2 hours, and Wei Wei Bai's appearance lasted for about 30 minutes. However, everyone felt that she was the main character. She danced in her white and red dress. It was so stunning that everyone who was watching the movie gasped. In the movie, this girl had displayed acting skills that were beyond her age, and her stunning beauty could be passed down in film history. In the story, she had a crush on her brother. Her struggle, pain, and unwavering determination pushed the film to its climax. Especially when she died, it coincided with her real life. This scene made many people cry on the spot. When it was over, everyone couldn't calm down for a long time. The next day, a piece of news was pushed to the #1 trending topic. We didn't just kill an innocent sister. We killed a genius actress. Wei Wei Bai was completely and truly famous. It was not the red of a shooting star. It was the kind of red that would be passed down forever, and no one could forget her. The title of the nation's little sister. It also began to become popular. All this clamor on the internet made many people ignore it. Lu Zixi had disappeared for a long time. Xiao Yi also spent a lot of time before he finally found him. When he found his whereabouts, Xiao Yi was so scared that he drove through the night and desperately rushed to his location. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 491. The location was an old abandoned warehouse in the suburbs. He got out of the car and ran over, but the door to the warehouse suddenly opened. Lu Zixi was dressed in a black trench coat. His hair was messy, his beard was unkempt, and his eyes were bloodshot. Xiao Yi stopped in his tracks, suddenly not daring to go forward. Lu Zixi lazily raised his eyes, casually took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a drag. It was still that elegant, that beautiful posture. The red of the cigarette flickered in the night, but it made the bloodstains on his fingers even clearer. Xiao Yi shuddered as he took 2 steps forward. Only then did he clearly see that Lu Zixi body was covered in blood. Xiao Yi's throat felt like it was blocked by a stone. It was very uncomfortable. You killed someone? Lu Zixi smiled, ruthless and cold. Not only did I kill her, but I also cut her to pieces. Xiao Yi's legs went soft and he sat on the ground. He reached out and rubbed his face in frustration. You're crazy, Lu Zixi. Wei Bai didn't let you live so you could become a murderer. The person Lu Zixi killed. It was the female fan who killed Wei Bai. That female fan was a loyal fan of Lu Zixi. The type that liked Lu Zixi. Before she assassinated Lu Zixi, she said on Weibo that her beloved idol had shattered her dreams. Later, after she killed Wei Bai, the fan ran away. Even the police were still looking for her. But they weren't as fast as Lu Zixi. After he found her, he killed her. When Lu Zixi heard the 3 words, Wei Bai, the hand holding the cigarette trembled violently. He stared blankly at the cigarette. The calm in his bloodshot eyes crumbled. Xiao Yi looked up and saw Lu Zixi's face full of tears. She's dead, Lu Zixi said softly. As he spoke, he trembled as he smoked. But this action only made his tears fall more and more. Do you know what I was thinking when she died? Lu Zixi's eyes were full of tears as he chuckled. He said, 1 word at a time, I couldn't wait for everyone to die. The fans who used to like him. The people who had made him the best actor. They all deserved to die. If it weren't for these people, public opinion wouldn't have been pushed up, and no one would have come to kill him. Wei Bai would not have died. Xiao Yi was also very uncomfortable. Calm down. Lu Zixi turned his back and didn't speak. The cigarette burned his fingers, but he didn't feel anything. Xiao Yi comforted him. Wei wouldn't want you to be like this. Even if she dies, she'll still be a good child going to heaven. If you're like this, you won't be able to reunite with her even after you die. After saying that, Xiao Yi really wanted to slap himself. What kind of consolation was that? But these words finally shattered Lu Zixi's calm. His back started to tremble, and he finally started to sob. Xiao Yi sat in a daze, watching as Lu Zixi collapsed and crouched down. Then, she cried miserably for the entire night. Afterwards, Xiao Yi watched as Lu Zixi calmed down. He disposed of the body after the murder. Then, he expressionlessly said to Xiao Yi, "Don't let anyone know that you were here." Xiao Yi didn't know how to persuade him, so he could only sigh helplessly. The next time they met was when DreamWorks Like Dreams won an international award. Lu Zixi won Best Actor. Wei Bai won Best Actress. This wasn't a sympathy vote, but because their performances in DreamWorks Like Dreams were too wonderful. Lu Zixi, dressed in a black suit, gloomily walked towards the podium. He took the trophy. Then, he took the microphone and spoke to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank, no. Lu Zixi paused slightly, then coldly said, I have no one to thank. Today, I came here to tell all the trash that if I could, I would kill you all. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the mobile article. https://m/sashu.com/. Chapter 492. To me, each and every one of you, fans, audience, and people who love me, are all murderers. Lu Zixi's eyes were as cold as the abyss. He reached out and smashed the trophy in his hand onto the stage. The host wanted to come up. Mr. Lu Zixi turned back, his eyes filled with hostility as he coldly looked at him. The host suddenly didn't dare to persuade him. Lu Zixi casually reached out and pulled at his collar. Because his fingers used too much force, he even tore off a few buttons. His face was pale, and his bangs fell over his forehead. His entire person stood on the stage, but he gave off a chilling and ruthless feeling. Lu Zixi continued to turn back and look at the dumbfounded audience. From the day the person I loved most died, I also died. I once wanted to kill all of you, regardless of the consequences. He had even planned it out. A grand memorial service was held. Spend a huge amount of money to get thousands of his fans to attend. Then detonate the bomb and perish together with them. Why should his sister lie in a cold urn while these indirect murderers could still live well? But in the end he dispelled the idea. He was afraid that after he died, his whole body would be covered in filthy blood. If Wei Wei saw it, she might dislike him for being dirty and not want him. Lu Zishi coldly looked at everyone. Finally, he turned his gaze to the camera. Then he slowly revealed a cold smile. To those who like me, I'll say this: you really disgust me. With that, Lu Zishi's face was cold as he stepped off the stage. Then he swaggered off. He drove straight to the police station. He called the chief. I want to turn myself in. The chief ran over with a group of policemen and saw Lu Zishi in a black suit. He was sitting in a chair with a cigarette between his fingers, his eyes empty and deep. Chief, Mr. Lu Zishi lazily turned his head and carelessly blew out a smoke ring. Through the hazy smoke, he said indifferently, I killed Bai Ziwen and that slut who killed Wei Wei. I kept the tools, the corpses, and the video evidence of my murders. These words stunned everyone. Someone would keep a video of their own murder? Lu Zishi seemed to be talking about someone else. He was frighteningly calm. Intentional homicide and vile behavior. A death sentence should be enough. On the day of the execution, Xiao Yi came to visit with a tired expression. No matter how rich and powerful the Lu family was, they simply couldn't let Lu Zishi off the hook. Not to mention that Lu Zishi had made ample preparations. Just to get a death sentence. The lawyer had no other choice. Lu Zishi didn't leave himself any way out. Xiao Yi ran until his legs broke, all for the sake of a reprieve. In the end, Lu Zishi threatened them with a phone call, and none of the lawyers dared to take on the case. He was determined to die. No one could stop him. When the death sentence was handed down, Xiao Yi stared blankly at the verdict for the entire night, his mind completely blank. To him, the fact that Flower Blossom's box office had reached the top was more like a huge irony. Lu Zishi sat expressionlessly in his chair. He looked much more haggard, and his hair had lost its luster. His face became thinner, and his eyes became deeper and darker. His face was still handsome, but there was a cold, murderous aura. Seeing him like this, Xiao Yi couldn't help but rub his eyes. A grown man couldn't stop his tears. Lu Zishi, you're too hard on yourself. Step by step, he had personally pushed himself to the point of death. Even a madman couldn't be so cruel to himself. Lu Zishi's eyes barely changed. The moment the hospital announced Wei Wei Bai's death, he was completely dead. Sitting here today was nothing more than a walking corpse. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://www.sashu.com download the full article. https://m.sashu.com/// The next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like. Chapter 493. Xiao Yi cried as he said, You're going to be shot today. Do you have any last wishes? Lu Zishi was silent for a moment, then said in a slightly hoarse voice, I don't have any wishes. All my wishes are related to Wei Wei. If she died, he would have no wishes. It's just a pity. His gaze softened. The first time I met her was in bed. At that time, we were drunk and confused. Xiao Yi cried as he said, We're already sleeping together. What's there to regret? Lu Zishi sighed. I thought about it a few times later, but I couldn't remember what I felt like that night. Later, I didn't dare to really do her because we were siblings. Xiao Yi, Lu Zishi couldn't help but laugh. Later, when she found out that we weren't siblings, she left me. Xiao Yi. So what's your regret? Lu Zishi said indifferently, "It's a pity that I didn't really make love with her when I was sober." Xiao Yi, this beast, he's about to die, but he still regrets this? Lu Zishi glanced at the time. "Okay, it's time." He stood up, and the prison guard came over to handcuff him and take him to the execution site. Xiao Yi sat there in a daze. After waiting for a long time, he heard the faint sound of a gunshot in the distance. His body trembled violently. He didn't know how long he was stiff, but Xiao Yi finally stood up. He still had to collect Lu Zishi's body. Lu Zishi said that his ashes would be mixed with Wei Wei Bai's, and that they would be inseparable even in death. It was a love that was crazy to death. Xiao Yi really wanted to curse out loud. Unfortunately, the man he scolded was no longer there. Qin Qiu listened to the entire dream. He pondered for a moment, then said, "Didn't you just take a nap for half an hour? You had such a long dream. You really have a rich imagination." Yi Yuxuan silently looked at the cigarette in his hand. His fingers were slender, and the way he held the cigarette was exceptionally beautiful. "After waking up, do you know what I want to do?" Qin Qiu was confused. Yi Yuxuan said calmly, "I want to help the man in the dream realize his wish." Qin Qiu, "What wish?" Yi Yuxuan glanced at him faintly, then put the cigarette in the ashtray after only 2 puffs. "Sleep with her once." Qin Qiu was stunned. Yi Yuxuan had already turned around and walked out. Qin Qiu reacted, "Wait, that dream was made up by you. You just want to do that, Wei Wei Bai." With that said, Yi Yuxuan was nowhere to be seen. Qin Qiu was speechless for a moment and finally felt relieved. "You've grown up and can think about women." Wei Wei Bai wanted to get up, but she didn't have the strength. Prodigal Tong, even if Yi Yuxuan was lying down, I wouldn't be able to climb into his bed. The system flipped around. "I still have a piece of chocolate left. It just expired. You can have it." Wei Wei Bai, "So you're saying that you're going to poison me to death, and then you don't need a strategy?" The system. "No, system, the chocolate is refreshing. It forcibly increases the body's activity. A piece of chocolate can keep you excited for at least 3 hours. Not to mention walking, even spinning and jumping would not be a problem." Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before saying, "You eat so many chocolates that forcibly refresh and improve the body's condition because the system was nervous." "Did she find out that it, Wei Wei Bai, is it because your kidneys are weak?" "The system," Wei Wei Bai said earnestly, "take it easy, don't damage your body." The system gritted its teeth. "I'm still a virgin." "Wei Wei Bai, that's true. You're such a poor and short system, I don't think anyone would like you." Below to record this reading. Chapter 494. His fingers gently lifted her towel and touched the smooth skin of her waist. Wei Wei Bai couldn't control herself and was tickled. She pushed Yi Yuxuan away and bit her lip. The corners of her mouth couldn't help but curl up, and a muffled laugh sounded. Her black eyes were full of water vapor, with a rippling smile. Her lips were pursed, bright red and moist, which could hook a person's soul out. Yi Yuxuan paused. 97 days of life. Wei Wei Bai heard that her life points were increasing crazily and looked at Yi Yuxuan with special interest. His white shirt was soaked in water, and he looked slender and thin, but the lines of his muscles were faintly discernible in his clothes. His skin was very white, but it wasn't the kind of unhealthy white. It was clean, like he was pampered. He lowered his head and stared at her with his beautiful black eyes. His thin lips were wet, and he looked particularly lustful. Wei Wei Bai didn't know why, but her heart beat a few beats faster. She was actually a little nervous. This wasn't a game, and it wasn't a calm and emotionless game. In reality, she didn't have any advantage. In fact, she couldn't even control her emotions. For the first time, Wei Wei Bai realized that if she wanted to conquer Yi Yuxuan, it wouldn't be as easy as it was in a plane. Because her emotions would fluctuate. She would even be attracted to him. Even if it was just because the other party's appearance was too perfect, and her mood fluctuated naturally. It also made Wei Wei Bai feel strange and uncomfortable. Yi Yuxuan seemed to sense her retreat. He was like a vigilant beast, and suddenly took a step forward. Wei Wei Bai instinctively took a step back. He took a step forward, silent and forbearing, but there was an aggressive light in his eyes. Soon, the two of them squeezed into a corner of the bathroom, body to body. Wei Weibai finally had time to speak. "Yi Yuxuan, what's wrong with you?" Yi Yuxuan looked at her deeply. His breathing was still chaotic. He lowered his voice and said hoarsely, "I want to fuck you." Wei Weibai was shocked. "Wait, what did she just hear?" The system was shocked as well. "Wait a minute, that should be the host's line." Yi Yuxuan reached out and pulled up her wet hair, revealing her white and delicate neck. He lowered his head and kissed her neck. Noticing the trembling of her skin, he asked, "Can I?" Perhaps he was being manipulated by his own dreams. He had never been so impulsive before, and he had never experienced so many emotional fluctuations. But Yi Yuxuan felt that he was actually willing to be controlled. Maybe it wasn't his dream that was controlling him. It was the faint fragrance on her body and her soft body that was controlling him. HP favorability, 100 days. Wei Weibai, who was still hesitating, decided to go all out. 100 days of life was more than what she could get from conquering 3 planes. Just as she was about to nod, the warrior fired a shot. The system said, "Stop harvesting HP." Wei Weibai asked, "Why did it stop?" The system said, "Your current body can accommodate more than 100 days of external HP. Wait until the next plane is successfully conquered, then you can continue to expand your body." The HP given by the system was all gone. Wei Weibai's 100 days of life were all from Yi Yuxuan. "Wei Weibai, why is it so hard to live? What did she do wrong?" Yi Yuxuan's kiss was already slowly moving down. He was a little inexperienced, but he was seriously exploring this delicate field. Suddenly, a hand pressed against his lips. Yi Yuxuan looked up at her blankly. His eyes were a little wet, tempting her without her knowing. Wei Weibai's heart was hooked by his eyes. Her words of rejection were stuck in her mouth for a moment. Chapter 495. Qin Qiu said, "You have to believe me, my Xiao Xian really likes Wei Wei." Bai Changyan said, "I like you, can I sleep with you?" Qin Qiu spat out a mouthful of blood. These words were too lethal, directly killing Qin Qiu. Bai Changyan was determined. He opened the door of the ward and found that the caregivers were not there. Yi Yuxuan's back was facing him. Under the light, his slender white fingers were holding a small bra. He seemed to be hesitating on how to put it on her. Yi Yuxuan sensed someone coming in. His first reaction was to pull the blanket and wrap Wei Weibai like a dumpling. Then he turned around, holding the bra in his hand, his posture elegant and natural, his handsome face cold and noble. Bai Changyan, Qin Qiu. Bai Changyan finally reacted. He staggered a few steps. Qin Qiu immediately supported him. Bai Changyan was angry. "What did you do to her?" Yi Yuxuan looked at him coldly. He calmly replied, "What I do to my wife, I don't need to report to you." Old Father Bai was so angry that he passed away. Wei Weibai was dizzy. "Tongzi, your chocolate is poisonous." She was blocked by Yi Yuxuan in the bathroom. She started to feel dizzy. Her brain could not work at all. She was even seduced by Yi Yuxuan. How embarrassing. The system said, "Maybe it's expired, that's why you're drunk on chocolate, don't eat these next time." Its body was strong, so it could withstand eating expired things. The host's body was weak. If she ate 2 more pieces of chocolate, she would probably die. It could not let her eat it next time. Wei Weibai rubbed the bridge of her nose. A respectful voice suddenly came from the side. "Your Majesty, what do you plan to do with this assassin?" "Your Majesty? Isn't this the title of the emperor? Is she cross-dressing again?" Wei Weibai looked up and saw a woman wearing a round collar and wide sleeves bowing to her politely. Wei Weibai's mind went blank for a moment because of this masculine outfit. The system notification sounded. This mission is to obtain the love of Feng Yunyan. Target, Feng Yunyan. Progress, 0. Time, 4 months. When Wei Weibai heard the mission notification, she was distracted for a moment. There were already people around him talking about it. This is a heinous crime. How dare you assassinate the sovereign king? You deserve to have your entire family wiped out. You have to tie them up and display them on the streets. Then, you have to dismember them to intimidate others. Every time there was a discussion, she heard it. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -25. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -30. -35. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but scold them in a low voice. All of you, shut up. No one dared to make a sound. Bai Wei Wei's line of sight finally focused. First, she saw the antique furniture. There was a huge screen in front of her. It was night time, so there were lanterns everywhere. It was as bright as day. She looked down and saw a sorry figure lying in front of her. He was wearing a white robe and his black hair fell to the ground. Just his back was stunning. It was as if he felt her gaze. The man lying on the ground finally looked up. White jade-like skin, black as ink eyes, and impeccably handsome features. His thin lips were tightly pursed and his eyes were cold as he looked at Wei Wei Bai with hatred. Wei Wei Bai, it looks like he has a grudge against her. As expected, the system's voice sounded again. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -40. Wei Wei Bai, host, please receive the original owner's memory. Wei Wei Bai frowned because of her headache. Feng Yunyan saw her uncomfortable appearance and thought it was because of the wound. He couldn't help but reveal a mocking smile. Transmigration system, male god, come here. 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 Chapter 496. He thought that Wei Wei Bai would immediately order someone to drag him down and behead him. However, Wei Wei Bai's brows suddenly relaxed as she glanced at him indifferently. Her lips suddenly curled up, and her cold and elegant facial features were dazzling under the light. Then, he only heard her indifferent voice with a hint of sweetness as she said, "Put him in the heavenly prison and discuss it later." The female official stepped forward and immediately said, "Your Majesty, such a traitor must be beheaded on the spot to deter the thieves." Wei Wei Bai's cold eyes darkened as she released her aura. "Since when do I need you to question my words? Scram for me to receive your punishment." The female official immediately knelt down with a pale face. Because of the emperor's anger, everyone followed suit and knelt on the ground. Feng Yunyan lowered his head as a gloomy calculation flashed through his eyes. His thoughts were gloomy and he was just about to say something. Suddenly, a jade finger, soft and with unquestionable strength, lifted his chin. His long eyelashes trembled as his fingers dug into the ground. His face was incomparably cold. However, he suddenly heard a voice with a hint of laughter. "It's just a small assassin. So what if he's a remnant of the Feng family? He's still an ant under my feet." Feng Yunyan's expression turned cold as he glared fiercely at the woman sitting above him. However, he saw that her eyebrows were languid, her snow-white skin was lustrous, and her smile was cold and elegant. It made him dazed for a moment. Her indifferent voice sounded, "You're not bad-looking. Serve me." When Feng Yunyan heard this, his eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. His fingers dug into the ground until they bled. However, her fingertips slid across the skin of his jaw. It caused him to tremble. Without waiting for him to react, several attendants rushed over, tied up Feng Yunyan, and took him away. Wei Wei Bai saw that the person in question had left. She quickly waved her hand and had everyone retreat. When there was no one around, Wei Wei Bai helplessly reached out to support her forehead. "Do you think I'm not rich enough to die? This time, it's about revenge for the country and family. Feng Yunyan probably has the heart to eat me alive." This time, the world she transmigrated to was a bit strange. It was the female supremacy's world. The supremacy, as the name suggested, was inferior to men and women. The officials were all women, and the emperor was also a woman. Men had to stay at home and do housework. And Feng Yunyan was the prince of the previous dynasty. In this plane she was called by Wei Wei, and her identity was a general of the previous dynasty. Speaking of the original owner, he was simply a super winner in life who was so cool and domineering that he had cheated all the way. At 15 years old, Wei Wei Bai. At the age of 17, he had become a guardian general of the Feng dynasty. Then, at the age of 20, he started a rebellion, killed everyone in the royal family, and successfully ascended the throne, changing the surname of the world to Bai. Feng Yunyan escaped the massacre, but he never forgot to take revenge. After planning for a long time, he finally managed to sneak in among the songstress tonight and succeed in the assassination. She transmigrated, so it could only be considered a half success. The system comforted her. This world is good. You can do whatever you want. Men are weak and helpless. You're as strong as an ox. Are you happy? Wei Bai, strong as an ox. The system continued to comfort her. It's just revenge for the country. You can even resolve the revenge of having your penis cut off. How can a small revenge trouble you? Wei Bai revealed a happy smile. Then she said, "Do you think I'll let you buy snacks if you flatter me?" The system, Wei Bai, if you dare to steal my life points in this world, you'll have a grudge with me for having your penis cut off. The system silently covered its crotch. Wei Bai, right, where's my side reward? The punishment of almost running naked in the previous world left a deep impression on her. The system rummaged in the inventory. The reward is the world's best martial arts. Please accept. Wei Bai had never seen such a substantial reward. The world's best martial arts, did it mean she could fly? Chapter 497. Feng Yunyan's eyes suddenly became affectionate. Your Majesty, if I become your man, what position will you give me? His face was like jade, and his long eyelashes covered half of the emotions in his eyes. When he pursed his thin lips, his seductive smile reached the tip of one's heart. Wei Bai, who was forcing herself to play the role of a domineering CO. Why did she feel that this behavior of his was somewhat familiar? Feng Yunyan suddenly bit his lower lip lightly and frowned, causing one to feel pity for him. Your Majesty, you're hurting me. Wei Bai was disgusted by his sweet voice, and her fingers trembled. Feng Yunyan's eyes flashed coldly, like a poisonous snake harboring evil intentions. A black needle suddenly appeared on his finger, and he ruthlessly stabbed it into Wei Bai's hand. Wei Bai had the best martial arts in the world. If this was in the world of martial arts, she would definitely be an expert with a blower and a master of background music. She reacted very quickly. Withdrawing her hand and rolling her body, she directly fell off the bed. With one leg still on the bed, Wei Bai, who was upside down, suddenly remembered that Feng Yunyan looked familiar just now. Wasn't this her way of pretending to be pitiful? She somewhat understood the system's feelings. It really burned her eyes. Feng Yunyan rolled up his hand and covered himself with the blanket. He quickly rushed to the side of the bed and attacked again with the needle in his hand. Wei Bai awkwardly rolled on the ground again. She dodged his fierce attack. Then she reached out and snatched the needle away. Ignoring the hatred in his eyes, she grabbed his blanket and threw him back on the bed. Like a hungry wolf, she pounced on him. The two of them immediately rolled into a ball. Feng Yunyan only felt that her body was flexible and strong, fiercely suppressing him. Both of their breaths were in a mess. Her face was flushed red, and her rapid breathing tickled his chin. Feng Yunyan's mind was full of calculations and cold, murderous intent. However, he was also momentarily distracted by her aura. Before he could calm down, his lips were sucked on by someone else. Feng Yunyan's entire body stiffened, and his scalp felt like it was going to explode. He had never been so close to another woman. However, Wei Bai had ruthlessly broken his cold boundary. She had violated him again and again. His lips trembled and his eyes were dark as he stared at her. However, he saw that her eyes were full of smiles. Surprisingly, there wasn't a trace of lust in it. Instead, it was clear and gentle. Her kiss was incomparably gentle, with a feeling of cherishing. Feng Yunyan was in a bit of a daze. His ice-cold heart was filled with calculations, but for a moment, he couldn't operate them. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -40. The smile in Wei Bai's eyes deepened. She let go of his lips without a trace of blame. Alright, go to bed early. When you've thought it through and become my person, I'll tell you what position I'll give you. These words were spoken calmly and forcefully. This made Feng Yunyan feel ashamed and angry. He had actually been absent-minded just now. Wei Wei Bai let go of her hand. Suddenly, she frowned and her body softened. What's wrong with the system hitting me? You were too high and got a failure in acting cool. Your whole body is paralyzed, your eyes are slanted, your mouth is crooked, and your limbs are cramping. My condolences. Wei Wei Bai frowned. She laid on Feng Yunyan's body. Just as she was about to struggle, her body was pushed away. Feng Yunyan's expression was extremely calm. He pushed her away and slowly got up. His movements were neither fast nor slow. He pulled a robe from the side and put it on. Then he raised his smooth and delicate chin, revealing a cold sneer. I told you I'm poisonous, but you didn't believe me. Wei Wei Bai's body was paralyzed. She couldn't even speak. The system had already explained to her, Feng Yunyan's body is poisonous because of drug testing when he was young. If anyone touches it, they'll be paralyzed in mild cases and die in severe cases. Wei Wei Bai said, why didn't you say so earlier? The system said, when you're hungry, your brain doesn't work very well. You know. Wei Wei Bai, is there a more shameless system? Is there? Chapter 498. Feng Yunyan got off the bed. The room was empty. He pulled out the sword from the wall, his eyes dark. This room was built by the Feng family. But now, it had become Wei Wei Bai's. The ridicule in Feng Yunyan's good-looking eyes grew stronger. He was like a cold reptile in the dark, finally showing its sharp teeth. He walked to the bed and looked at it with a murderous look. The woman on the bed had hair as black as the finest satin, shining with a luster. Her appearance was beautiful. Even in this situation, her eyes were still so clear and peaceful. Feng Yunyan wanted to see his enemy crying and begging for mercy. She was not as indifferent as she was now. Do you know what I was thinking when you killed the people from the imperial family? Wei Wei Bai was still arguing with the system. Think of a way. If I don't get the antidote, I'll be stabbed in the heart. I'm hungry. Are you a rice bucket? Why are you always hungry? I'm so hungry that I'm weak and helpless, so pitiful. Go to the cafeteria and get a meal. Just treat it as me dismissing a beggar. The system immediately came to life. Okay, you have to use 5 days of life to buy an antidote vaccine. After you buy it, you can fight against the poison in his body. Wei Wei Bai. Suddenly, she felt that something was wrong. A hand grabbed her collar and lifted her up. Wei Wei Bai looked up and saw Feng Yunyan's cold, murderous look. Am I like an ant in your eyes? He held the sword and asked her a question. She looked at him with disdain and didn't say a word. What he wanted to see was his enemy weeping bitterly, not her indifferent and fearless appearance. Wei Wei Bai, warrior, you misunderstood. Feng Yunyan did not give her a chance to speak. He threw her onto the bed and placed his sword on her neck. His voice became gentle and demonic. Perhaps I should thank you. Back then, you killed all my family members to pave the way for me. Wei Wei Bai was at a loss. Paving the way? Feng Yunyan laughed softly. I hate those people from the Feng family even more than you do. Why are only women valued while men are abandoned like shoes? The laughter grew louder and louder, and in the end, it became somewhat deranged. On his handsome face, there was a smug and arrogant smile. It was so dazzling that people couldn't take their eyes off him. Who said that men can't be above others and can't be the ruler of this dynasty? After killing you, I will be the last legitimate successor of the Feng family. Wei Wei Bai, so ambitious. Feng Yunyan raised his eyebrows proudly. When the time comes, I will be the first man to succeed the throne. Wei Wei Bai started to consider. Would she be able to get 100 favorable impression points if she gave him the throne? Her neck hurt a little. The blade cut her skin. Feng Yunyan calmed down. So you can go and die. Wei Wei Bai had just eaten the vaccine and could move. She was about to break free. The door suddenly opened. Feng Yunyan turned around warily. But he saw a familiar figure. It was a trusted female official by Wei Wei Bai's side. Feng Yunyan relaxed. Have you finished the deployment? After killing Wei Wei Bai, immediately massacre Wei Wei Bai's loyal subordinates. The female official sneered and waved her hand. The people she brought immediately pulled out their swords. After you kill the emperor, you have no value. Feng Yunyan's face turned pale. He looked at them coldly. Are you betraying me? The female official was a spy hidden by Wei Wei Bai's side. She was also the most loyal official who supported Feng Yunyan's ascension. The female official laughed. You are really funny, Feng Yunyan. As a man, you actually want to ascend the throne? Dream on. Feng Yunyan staggered a few steps. He almost couldn't hold the sword in his hand. Slash. Chapter 499. His eyes became violent and sorrowful. So what if I'm a man? I'm the only one left in the Feng family. If I don't take the throne, who will? Otherwise, how could he believe the words of this female official? To carry out this thrilling assassination, he had to do it. The female official snorted. Your sister, Her Highness Princess Feng Ling, faked her death to avoid a disaster. She is the most legitimate successor. What are you? Feng Yunyan's voice finally trembled. Feng Ling? The female official said, you killed the traitor Wei Wei Bai. We will kill you and then welcome Princess Feng Ling back to ascend to the throne. Feng Yunyan's face was extremely pale. He looked at them coldly, and a feeling of despair surged from his heart. As a man, did he deserve to be abandoned? Did he deserve to be used? The female official said fiercely, men, kill them. The female soldier wielding a knife immediately rushed over. Feng Yunyan saw a knife ruthlessly slashing towards his head. He no longer had the strength to struggle. He could only stand there and wait for death. Suddenly, a hand was placed on his waist. A huge force pulled him into a soft embrace. Shock flashed through Feng Yunyan's eyes. The sword in his hand was taken away. A white light flashed. The long sword blocked the knife that was about to kill Feng Yunyan. The sound of the sword clashing rang out. Feng Yunyan came back to his senses. He looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai with a faint smile. She didn't look like she was poisoned. Her voice was soft and slightly hoarse. What a good mantis stalking the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. When the female official saw that she was fine, her expression turned ugly. Your Majesty, you weren't poisoned? Wei Wei Bai was as calm as the wind. That depends on what kind of poison you look at. If it's the love poison, then I'm really beyond cure. These were teasing words. It made Feng Yunyan's ears turn red. At this time, she was still so indecent. Wei Wei Bai smiled at him. This smile dispersed the coldness, only full of charm. It was simply captivating. Feng Yunyan held his breath and his heart skipped a beat. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -35. Wei Wei Bai's smile deepened. She lifted his chin with a doting finger. Why didn't you say so earlier that you wanted my country? Feng Yunyan pursed his lips. His eyes were filled with vigilance. What was this woman trying to do? Why did she treat him like this? The next moment, his mind went blank. She lowered her head and kissed him deeply. The tip of her tongue licked the corner of his lips and bit him gently. His body began to tremble. His face turned even redder, and his eyes were filled with anger and helplessness. The female officers suddenly didn't care anymore. Everyone is under our control. Even if they aren't poisoned, we can still kill them. After saying that, she took the knife and quickly slashed at Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head and kissed him without any change in her posture. Just as the knife was about to fall, the sword in her hand flashed with a white light and stabbed into the female official's body. The female official was dead. This sword was called 100% stabbing to death. Even if it was stabbed with the hilt, it was a unique skill that could kill people. The number one in the world was really lonely and seeking defeat. Shimen Chue Shue. Feng Yunyan didn't expect that Wei Wei Bai's martial arts would be so high. He looked at her in confusion. Wei Wei Bai left his lips and curled her lips. Don't be afraid, man, Zhen will protect you. After saying that, she let go of him and jumped off the bed. Then with a swish, 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 she chopped those traitors to death. This move, it was called cutting melons and vegetables. As the name suggested, when this move was put into effect, it was as if it was being executed. In Wei Wei Bai's eyes, everyone automatically turned into cabbages and melons. She cut cleanly without any psychological burden. Corpses were everywhere and blood flowed like a river. For the first time, Feng Yunyan was so shocked. She was actually this powerful. Wei Wei Bai threw the sword away as if nothing had happened. She was barefoot with her hair down. The sun had just risen. She suddenly turned around and said with a smile, Feng Yunyan, Zhen really likes you. Why don't you try to love Zhen? Feng Yunyan wasn't prepared at all and was hit by this sentence. His anger surged. Wei Wei Bai, is it fun to play with me? If I love you, what will you give me in exchange? How could a person change so quickly? She said she liked him? She just wanted to treat him like a clown. Wei Wei Bai turned to look out of the window. The morning light shone on her gorgeous face. It was so beautiful that it was illusory. Then Feng Yunyan heard her say, What will you give me in exchange? I'll take you as my husband. How about it? Chapter 500. You can search Time Transmigration System, Male God, come to search book, www.sashu. Come find the using the country as a betrothal gift. Feng Yunyan's deep and unshakable heart was cracked by these words. Ding, the male lead's affection is at -30. His fingers were tightly clenched into his palm as the pain made him come back to his senses. It was just a joke. Wei Wei Bai slowly walked in front of him. Her back was to the light and her smile was incomparably gentle. What, are you so moved that you can't speak? Feng Yunyan suppressed his anger. He had always suppressed his emotions and to put it nicely, he was calm. To put it bluntly, he was gloomy. He lowered his eyes and dug his fingers into his palms. All the emotions on his handsome face disappeared. Suddenly, he revealed a faint smile and the gentleness in his eyes became even more obvious. Your Majesty is joking. How can the country be used as a betrothal gift? This Yunyan cannot accept this gift. Wei Wei Bai stared at him with burning eyes. She revealed a smile. Her facial features were already gorgeous to begin with. When she smiled, she was like a peony, beautiful as a cluster of flowers. When Feng Yunyan was in the palace, he had seen many women. But there was not a single one that could compare to Wei Wei Bai's elegance. His heart flashed with a trace of amazement, but he suppressed it. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said, How about we make a bet? Feng Yunyan had already completely calmed down. His voice was gentle. What kind of bet does your Majesty want to make with an assassin like me? Wei Wei Bai's voice was gentle and serious. Let's bet on when I will fall in love with you. Feng Yunyan's thick eyelashes trembled and his cold eyes once again rippled. Didn't you not believe that I fell in love with you? Then I'll give you a chance. You can use any method to tempt me to fall in love with you. Her tone was filled with a trace of sweet temptation. It was clearly such a ridiculous suggestion, but she did not seem to be joking at all. Feng Yunyan finally looked up at her, but he saw a trace of burning innocence in her eyes as she looked at him expectantly. He didn't know why, but he couldn't help but look away. She didn't even need to address herself as this one. He used me instead. This was an equal term. Before Feng Yunyan could say anything, the other party suddenly groaned. He immediately looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai frowning and clutching her shoulder. His sleeves were stained with blood. This was the wound he had inflicted. Wei Wei Bai secretly grimaced. She had been too pretentious just now, and her wound had actually reopened. She pulled on the system and cried, Trash, it hurts. Tong Zhuang, who was engrossed in eating, said perfunctorily, Well, it won't hurt as long as you bear with it. Why don't you ask your man to blow on it for you? I'm sure you'll be as happy as a fairy. How will it hurt? Wei Wei Bai, good idea. She was just about to use her cool and domineering aura to make Feng Yunyan bow down to her charm and blow on her wound. However, A slender and fair hand had already tugged on her sleeve. Feng Yunyan lowered his head. His face was a little pale, and his cold and elegant face carried a trace of hesitation under the halo. I'm indebted to your Majesty's kindness. I've committed such a great crime, and I dare not covet the country anymore. If your Majesty still believes in me, I will definitely be loyal to you. Wei Wei Bai, oh, she looks like a fool. Loyalty with a favorability of -30. She wants to die. She revealed a big smile and took the opportunity to grab his hand and touch it. Welcome, welcome, you're here to tease? Oh no, to be loyal to me. This flattering smile made Feng Yunyan purse his lips, and a trace of calculation flashed across his eyes. Wei Wei Bai, this tyrannical and cruel woman, what exactly was her motive? Feng Yunyan laughed in his heart, and those cold schemes appeared again. Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come here. 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 Next time you open the bookshelf, you will see it. Chapter 501. No matter what her motive was, it was fine as long as he was alive. As long as he was alive, he could continue to climb up. Even if he had to pay the price of his body, he could endure using his beauty. One day he would stand at the top, and then he would kill all those who humiliated him, including Wei Wei Bai. Feng Yunyan thought of this, and the darkness in his eyes disappeared. He smiled faintly, as elegant as the moonlight. Your Majesty, you are injured. Let me take a look at you. Wei Wei Bai was about to nod. The door to the bedroom opened and a group of female soldiers and female officials appeared. They rushed in. Your Majesty, are you okay? This humble subject came late to save you and deserves to die. The female official suddenly saw Feng Yunyan and pulled out her sword. You assassin, you are still alive. What do you want to do to my Majesty? Feng Yunyan tugged on Wei Wei Bai's sleeve. When he heard the female official's words, he couldn't help but smile mockingly. He was indeed a dog that everyone wanted to beat. Just as he thought of this, his fingers were tightly gripped by someone. The mocking smile on his face disappeared. Then he heard Bai Weiwei's indifferent, but incomparably cold voice. You deserve to die. Where did the assassin come from? The female official was puzzled. Your Majesty, Wei Wei Bai turned around with a cold expression. The Emperor's aura made the people present not dare to breathe. You bunch of idiots. The imperial guards in the palace were replaced, but no one found it strange. Her eyes were cold as she looked at the officials lying on the ground. I have been too benevolent recently. That's why I allowed you bunch of officials to neglect your duties. The female officials didn't dare to breathe loudly and trembled. Your Majesty, please spare us. We are guilty. Wei Wei Bai sneered. Of course you are guilty. You dared to pull out your sword in front of me and even threatened to kill my people. Are you trying to rebel? The female officials immediately reacted. It turned out that the Emperor wasn't angry about the assassination. Instead, they had offended Feng Yunyan. All of the officials at the scene who had reached this position were shrewd people. Immediately, official reacted. Without caring about face, he immediately kowtowed to Feng Yunyan. This official has offended your highness. Please forgive this official, your highness. Feng Yunyan's expression froze when she heard the way her highness addressed her. However, the high and mighty official who had just shouted at him to kill him was now begging for his forgiveness in fear and embarrassment. He pursed his thin lips slightly, and the feeling of humiliation in his heart dissipated a little. His expression was complicated as he looked in front of him at Bai Weiwei, who was blocking the sword-drawing official. Her figure was exceptionally beautiful. Her white robe embroidered with dark patterns stuck to her slender waist and swayed down. Her enchanting and beautiful figure, just her back view alone could cause people to daydream. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at -25. Feng Yunyan's face suddenly turned red. He immediately looked away and clenched his teeth. What was he thinking? Wei Weibai heard that her favorability had increased, although it was only 5 points. It also proved that she had fallen in love with me. That's right. That's right, she had to stick to Mary Brainless Sue in this plane. Her basic strategy of dissing the heavens, dissing the earth, and only loving you would not change. Mary Sue was Feng Yunyan, and she was the loyal dog who loved Mary Sue to death. Was she still worried about the favorability not increasing? Her expression became even colder as she said coldly, "Did you not eat? Your pleas for mercy are too soft." The female officials immediately kowtowed desperately and shouted, "Spare us, Your Highness, we beg you to ask His Majesty for mercy and spare us this time." Feng Yunyan bit his lip. His thoughts were gloomy. He wanted to kill these people who looked down on him. But if his methods were too ruthless, would it be? Feng Yunyan's thoughts paused. He actually cared about Wei Weibai's thoughts just now. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. / transmigration system, male god, come here. The download address is at https://www. Sashu. Com. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. Chapter 502. Wei Weibai suddenly turned around, and her cold expression melted. She smiled gently, and the corners of her eyes were filled with tenderness. It could warm one's heart. "Yunyan, how do you want to deal with this group of people? We'll listen to you." Feng Yunyan's breathing paused, and his fingers stiffened. However, she still held his hand and refused to let go. There was no trace of the coldness and cruelty she had shown to others just now. "Don't be afraid. I'll make the decision for you. From now on, whoever dares to be disrespectful to you, I'll kill them." Feng Yunyan looked at her in a daze. However, he couldn't see any hesitation or deception on her face. She was actually serious? Feng Yunyan lowered his eyes and smiled faintly. "Your Majesty, you must be joking. How can I punish your officials?" Wei Weibai fell silent. Her eyes darkened, and no one knew what she was thinking. Feng Yunyan smiled, but his eyes were calm and indifferent. She finally remembered the importance of supporting her officials, even if it was an act to make him trust her. When it came to the point where she really wanted to punish the officials, she wouldn't continue acting. Wei Weibai finally relaxed her brows and smiled. This smile actually had a hint of innocence and sweetness that was accidentally exposed. To see such a sweet smile on a woman's face. It should be strange, but it was surprisingly beautiful. Even Feng Yunyan found it cute. She said, "I finally thought of how to punish them. Someone, drag this group of idiots out and spank them." Then, under Feng Yunyan's surprised gaze, all the female officials and soldiers who had drawn their swords. They were all dragged out, stripped of their pants, and spanked. There were screams one after another, and the sound of rods hitting flesh could be heard. Wei Weibai nodded in satisfaction. "This time, you've taught them a lesson. In the future, who dares to disrespect you?" Feng Yunyan's expression finally became complicated. These female officials were stripped of their trousers and beaten in public. Flesh wounds were easy to heal, but after being humiliated like this, in the future, they wouldn't even dare to raise their heads when they saw him. She was really using this method to make others not dare to offend him. When Feng Yunyan thought of this, she bit her lip hard and crushed her fluctuating emotions bit by bit. She definitely had a motive. Otherwise, why would she treat him like this? His heart was calm, and he pretended to be gentle on the surface. "Your Majesty, is it worth offending so many officials for Yunyan?" When Wei Weibai heard his words, her expression suddenly softened and tears welled up in her eyes. She was extremely moved. "That's right. For you, I even gave up my most loyal servant. For you, I was almost hacked to death. For you, I've done everything." This sudden change in expression stunned Feng Yunyan. Wei Weibai took the opportunity to lean against him and rub against him. The only thing missing was a tail wagging behind him. "So you're not going to compensate me?" Feng Yunyan felt that he didn't know how to react to the current Wei Wei Bai. Just now, he was clearly so tough and cold. But now, he asked softly, what compensation do you want? Bai Weiwei immediately had no sense of shame and eagerly said, give me a kiss and a hug. Of course, you can also love me Feng Yunyan wondered who this fool was. Of course, he couldn't say that. He could only reluctantly choose and finally said, let me hug you. Weiwei Bai opened her arms and hugged him tightly. Then she buried her head in his chest. Her breath, soft body, and docile posture. It made Feng Yunyan's body stiffen for a moment. His mind was a little flustered. Her posture was taboo. If he wanted to kill her, she wouldn't be able to avoid it. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 503. Kill her. He suddenly paused when this thought appeared in his mind. Wasn't this the best opportunity? Feng Yunyan's eyes turned cold, and his fingers moved slightly. A black poison needle appeared. She didn't react to the poison in his body, but that didn't mean that the poison in his needle couldn't kill her. After all, no one in this world was truly immune to all poisons. The needle slowly approached her body. As long as it pierced her skin a little, she would die. There was no doubt about it. He had painstakingly learned this poison technique when he was young. Feng Yunyan took a deep breath and was about to insert the needle. Wei Wei Bai said gently, Yun, I'll dismiss the harem. His fingers paused. What did you say? What did she mean by dismissing the harem? Didn't she understand? Wei Wei Bai's head was still buried in his chest, and her body was relaxed and comfortable. I'm a more traditional person. If I like someone, I like a pair for life. In the future, you'll be one of my pairs. His fingers trembled. What nonsense was this woman talking about? A pair for life? Was that something that could be said so casually? Didn't his mother, who was the empress, say the same thing to his father? But later, emperors were all fickle. Who would really keep this promise? Wei Wei Bai said, if I betray you in the future, you can kill me. I definitely won't resist. Feng Yunyan finally couldn't take it anymore. We've only met a few times, and I even tried to assassinate you. Why did she suddenly seem so deeply in love with him? This was simply too ridiculous. Wei Wei Bai felt comfortable hugging him, so she didn't let go and continued to act awkwardly. I can't help it. I just realized my feelings later. Feng Yunyan, feelings? Wei Wei Bai calmly made up a story. I fell in love with you at first sight, but I didn't want to admit it. You know that beautiful and popular people like me are very arrogant. Feng Yunyan, Wei Wei Bai shamelessly spouted nonsense. When you killed me, my brain was suddenly enlightened. I like you. Feng Yunyan, do you expect him to believe such nonsense? Wei Wei Bai looked up, her eyes sparkling. So, can you be with me? Feng Yunyan took a deep breath, and the needle in his hand disappeared. He clearly had countless reasons to doubt her. But when he met her clear and gentle eyes, all the words were stuck in his throat, and he could only indulge in her gaze. She suddenly smiled. Her eyes shone brightly, revealing her elegance. Just trust me this once, Yunian. I'm not the kind of incapable ruler who would give up his country for a beauty. This was the first time Feng Yunyan had heard someone describe him like this. His cold heart couldn't help but be immersed in her absurd but gentle words. With you by my side, I'll be able to do whatever it takes to skip the morning court session, to indulge in wine and meat, and to play with the nobles at the beacon. This was all done by the ruler of a fallen country. Feng Yunyan didn't know what to say. He felt that a person had to lie. Why didn't she say something that could lie? She was actually full of absurd words. Did she think that he would believe her nonsense? Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to know how ridiculous her words were. As she spoke, she revealed her true nature. Her voice actually became sweet and soft, with a hint of seduction. Not only can I do that, if you follow me, I can give you whatever you want. Feng Yunyan only felt that her voice was like a feather brushing against his heart. It made his throat tighten. Was he crazy? He actually felt that she was more seductive than the most beautiful man. And it didn't seem out of place at all. It was as if she was supposed to be like this. It was as if she wanted to draw out the darkness in his heart. Ding, the male lead's favorability is -20. Full text //. Download. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 504. Feng Yunyan lowered his eyes to hide the cold light in them. He didn't know why he was silent. Wei Weibai was still looking at him eagerly. She had already set herself up as a person who would devote the world to one person. So that explicit gaze was like that of a little puppy looking at a meat bone. Feng Yunyan didn't know what to think. He smiled faintly and said in a gentle voice, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for not abandoning me. I only ask for a peaceful place for the rest of my life. I don't dare to ask for anything else." Wei Weibai was like an auntie selling vegetables, trying her best to promote, "Don't you want the throne?" Feng Yunyan's face turned cold, and he almost couldn't suppress his murderous aura. "Oh, if I say I want the throne, will Your Majesty give it to me?" He questioned in an extremely sharp and cold voice. His forbearing temperament was disrupted by Wei Wei's incoherent and inexplicable words. Wei Weibai looked at the -20 favorability. This level of favorability was probably, the system seemed to know what she was thinking and immediately said, -20 favorability means that the male lead can't wait for you to die immediately. And every time he sees you, he will curse you to die quickly. Every time he thinks of you, he will wonder why you don't die. Wei Weibai, if giving him the throne could immediately increase his favorability to 100, she would force it even if he didn't accept it. But if she gave him the throne, would he increase his favorability? It probably wouldn't increase much. So if she gave him the throne now, she would die. Feng Yunyan saw Wei Weibai's expression become complicated, and his heart turned cold. Fake affection. His thin lips pursed into a good-looking smile, and his eyes suddenly became gentle. "The world is so important to Your Majesty. How can you say such absurd words as giving it away so easily?" Wei Weibai coughed lightly and said seriously, "I said, when I fall in love with you, I will definitely give you this country." Feng Yunyan sneered in his heart, but he still pretended to be hypocritical. "Then how do I count as His Majesty falling in love with me?" Wei Weibai reached out and touched his handsome face. She leaned closer to him and could almost see the endless coldness in his eyes. She smiled warmly. "When you fall in love with me, I will fall in love with you." Feng Yunyan's eyes trembled. He reached out to push her away, but he saw the wound on her shoulder. The blood was about to soak her sleeves, but she didn't seem to feel any pain. Like a rascal, she hugged him and refused to let go. He tried his best to throw Wei Weibai's nonsense to the back of his mind. In his heart, he had already calculated the best method for himself. No matter what Wei Weibai's purpose was. It didn't matter if he was a fool or if he was just toying with him. Now that Feng Ling outside the palace was eyeing him covetously, he wanted to become a man above all others. He could only use Wei Weibai. When he thought of this, he suppressed the anger and unwillingness in his heart and revealed a smile. He was handsome and elegant, with well-defined features. When he smiled, it was extremely moving. "Your Majesty, if you're really willing to bet with me, then I'll accept it." Wei Weibai's eyes lit up. "You're willing to seduce me, curry favor with me, and chase after me, just to get my love?" Seduce, curry favor, chase. Feng Yunyan's heart wavered when he heard her words. Could it be that she was planning to make him wag his tail and beg for pity, becoming a lowly prostitute to curry favor with her? No matter how down and out he was. It was absolutely impossible for him to be so cheap. The murderous intent in Feng Yunyan's eyes grew stronger. Wei Weibai flatteringly tugged at his sleeve and shook it. "And I will also seduce you, curry favor with you, and chase after you, just to get your love." The download address is at https://www. Sashu. Com the is at https://m Sashu. Com/. Chapter 505. She looked like a pug dog. Feng Yunyan felt a murderous aura in his heart. He almost suffocated to death. Wei Wei Bai giggled, "Love is mutual. You love me and I love you. After loving each other, we'll end up together." Feng Yunyan was so angry at her shameless words that his fingers trembled. He couldn't pretend anymore. This lunatic, what was she saying? Feng Yunyan pushed Bai Wei Wei away. His eyebrows raised and he became fierce. "Your Majesty, you should go treat your wounds. Don't tease me anymore." Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly and pursed her lips. She finally asked, "Are you angry?" Seeing her act like this, Feng Yunyan, who was seriously suspicious, felt that she was simply acting. He said coldly, "No, I wouldn't dare." Wei Wei Bai knew that going too far was as bad as not going far enough. She could only turn around and ask someone to call for the imperial physician. She didn't get any favorability points. She was a little listless, even her thin shoulders were slumped. Her back perfectly explained what it meant to be lonely and pitiful. Wei Wei Bai said, "I've been trying so hard to climb up the ladder. I don't even care about my face, but he still doesn't like me. I'm so sad." The system, who was stunned, finally responded, "No, have you gone crazy in this world? Let's not talk about your character setting, but the way you chase after people reveals your true nature." Wei Wei Bai said, "True nature? Are you saying that I'm very affectionate and noble?" The system said, "I was wondering why you're the same as a tram maniac, a stalker, a pervert, and a twisted domestic violence maniac. Even if that's your true nature, you can't show it and scare people." "Wei Wei Bai," the system said, "and you look like a pug dog. You're just short of kneeling and hugging the male lead's leg and shouting, whip me to death." "Wei Wei Bai," the system said, "Sigh, you've traveled through too many planes. Are you running out of brains?" "Wei Wei Bai, this isn't the first time I've met someone with a higher position than the male lead, so I'm just happy." In the past, she had always been the one trembling in fear of being killed by the male lead. In this plane, her martial arts were high, so she was not afraid of being killed. With a high status, they were not afraid of being killed. Feng Yunyan suspected her and hated her to death, but he could only swallow his anger and not do anything. Wei Wei Bai felt that this plane was simply heaven. If she wanted to violate her character setting, she could do whatever she wanted. So for a moment, he had a bit of freedom. Feng Yunyan turned his head and glanced at her indifferently. His expression didn't change much, but his brows furrowed slightly. Was she that upset? This thought floated in his mind. He couldn't help but laugh at himself. He was simply crazy. Why did he care so much about her? He looked away and realized that the killing intent in his heart had disappeared. He was so infuriated by her that he couldn't care less about killing her. Although his heart was still heavy, it was slightly better than before. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to -15. When Wei Wei Bai heard that the favorability had increased, her originally wavering thoughts immediately became firm. "Hey, Feng Yunyan likes me, perverted like a lapdog. Look, the favorability has increased." The system expressed that it didn't want to talk to this adulterous couple. It really wanted to use mosaic to smear Wei Wei Bai's face. When the imperial physician arrived, he immediately bandaged her wound. Wei Wei Bai suddenly stopped the imperial physician's actions and handed the white bandage to Feng Yunyan. "Here." Feng Yunyan's thoughts were gloomy, but his brain was extremely intelligent. Of course, he knew what she meant. But he pretended not to know. "Your Majesty, quickly let your imperial physician bandage your wound to prevent it from festering." The rejection was very obvious. Wei Wei Bai was still shameless. "Come, you're beautiful and cute. Bandage my wound and I'll recover quickly." Transmigration system, male god, come here. 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 Transmigration system, male god, come here, comma. Chapter 506. Feng Yunyan clenched his fists. Why did he want to beat her so much? He thought of his purpose and could only be patient. He said softly, "If your majesty doesn't mind, then let me do it." Wei Wei Bai immediately stood in front of him. Then she took off her clothes, revealing half of her shoulder. Feng Yunyan shook the bandage in his hand. He was a man after all. Seeing a woman so openly reveal her body. In the end, he still couldn't be bold enough to look carefully. The wound was deep, and the flesh was white. He felt pain just by looking at it. But Wei Wei Bai acted as if nothing had happened. She turned her back to him and didn't say a word. He had read ancient books before. In history, there were strange people who scraped bones to heal wounds. But in reality, he had never seen any of them. This wound was caused by him. Didn't she hate him at all? Feng Yunyan couldn't help but slow down his movements. He cleaned her wound and applied medicine. When his fingers touched her wound, her body tensed up, but she didn't say anything. Feng Yunyan's action of wrapping her bandages paused. But she urged, "What's wrong? I'm not afraid of pain. You don't have to be so careful." The system always automatically gave her painkillers. She really didn't feel any pain. Feng Yunyan pursed his lips and looked at her with deep eyes. How could it not hurt? With this kind of perseverance, it was no wonder that she could succeed in her rebellion and become the emperor. Disregarding her nonsense, Su Qinsi was still thinking about it. She was indeed a very powerful woman. A faint feeling of admiration floated in his heart. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -10. Wei Wei Bai, the temptation of being naked is working. Look, just showing my shoulder is enough to get favorability. The system mocked. Why don't you just strip naked? He'll definitely love you to death. Wei Wei Bai, that's right. This is a good method. The system picked up the chips. It really shouldn't have expected the host's moral integrity. Feng Yunyan finished dressing her wound and tying a knot in the bandage. When she was about to retract her fingers, her fingertips accidentally brushed against the skin of her shoulder. It was white, smooth, and translucent like lychee meat. His fingertips paused and his eyes darkened. After a while, he retracted his hand as if nothing had happened and said softly, "All right, Your Majesty." Wei Wei Bai turned around and looked at him with a smile in her eyes. Favorability level, 10. Feng Yunyan looked at her in confusion. Wei Wei Bai, I fell in love with you when the favorability level reached 100. Feng Yunyan pursed his lips. Even at this time, he still didn't forget to talk nonsense. Wei Wei Bai's lips curled up, and even her eyes sparkled. She smiled and said, "That's why you have to quickly fill up my favorability with you. Then, I'll give you everything you want." Feng Yunyan stared at her blankly. All he could see was her smiling face. Such a strong person who was not afraid of pain was smiling so cutely. For the first time, he felt that this woman was cute. She was not weak, nor was it a derogatory term. She was just purely good-looking. A burning sensation spread to his ears. He lowered his head, and his long hair covered the blush behind his ears. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to -5. The system looked at the rapidly increasing favorability and then looked at the host's infatuated face. Could it be that the male lead really liked infatuated and perverted lapdogs? It felt that it really didn't understand the hobbies of young people. Wei Wei Bai still had matters to attend to in the morning court, so she went to court. She had a proud look on her face, and the considerate servant beside her immediately said, "Your Majesty, will the Imperial Phoenix Monarch stay in your palace?" Wei Wei Bai nodded in satisfaction. "Of course, he will stay here with me in the future." The servant's heart immediately returned to her senses. After Wei Wei Bai left, she immediately brought several male servants and respectfully walked in front of Feng Yunyan. Feng Yunyan looked at them indifferently. His eyes were cold and arrogant, without a trace of the desolation of a fallen prince. The servant didn't dare to look up at him and only said, "Imperial Phoenix Monarch, if you want to serve me in bed, you must first take a bath." Feng Yunyan heard the two words "serve me in bed." A sharp coldness appeared on his gentle and handsome face. "Fast crossing system, Prince Charming, come over here." "Fast crossing system, Prince Charming, come over here." / fast crossing system. Prince Charming, come over here. Fast crossing system. Prince Charming, come over here. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the below to record this reading record. Fast crossing system. Prince Charming, come over here, comma. Chapter 507. As expected, how could she let him go? Was he really going to lower himself and curry favor with a woman he didn't like for the sake of power? Lord Feng? The servant urged. Feng Yunyan coldly looked at her. Are you going to serve me tonight? The servant said, yes, this is something to be happy about. Feng Yunyan slowly stood up. He hid the cold ridicule in his eyes and revealed a smile that wasn't a smile. It is indeed something to be happy about. Then I'll respectfully accept. These words were cold and didn't contain any joy at all. Wei Weibai sneezed. She rubbed her nose, this, that, and that. Release all 135 men in the palace, including those in the cold palace. The female officials kneeling below were shocked. Your Majesty, this is against the rules. Wei Weibai was expressionless. This is the rules. I'll give you all 3 days to scram. The original owner was a workaholic. Because the new dynasty had just been established, there was war in the east today and rebellion in the west tomorrow. So she was so busy that she didn't even go to the harem. Those men anxiously waited, but they didn't expect that the emperor would send them out of the palace. This simply caused an uproar. Because most of those men had good family backgrounds, many of them were the beloved sons of important officials in the court, waiting to become the emperor. How could they be willing to leave? One of the officials kowtowed and said, Your Majesty, is it because they didn't serve you well? Please forgive them. Wei Weibai looked at the time. It was already dark. Her time was precious and she didn't want to waste it on these insignificant people. She stood up and prepared to leave. Her voice was incomparably cold. This one hasn't even seen them, so what service is there to speak of? These words must not be spread. Those who don't know will think that this one is a playboy. The officials knelt on the ground. This one asks Your Majesty to take back this order. Wei Weibai walked away. If you want to kneel, then kneel. This one doesn't care about supper. They watched as Wei Weibai walked out. Suddenly she stopped in her tracks. The female officers looked at her pitifully. However, all he heard was Wei Weibai's warm voice. I don't need a harem. In this life, I only want one person. He is more important than everyone in the world. With that she left. Leaving behind a pile of officials who had no supper to eat, they continued to kneel. Bai Weiwei perfectly pretended to be pretentious and returned to the palace. She walked into the bedroom and found that the attendants were not there. She softly called out, Yunyan? A cold wind blew in from the window and the candlelight flickered. A slender figure was faintly discernible on the bed. Wei Weibai walked over and lifted the veil. However, she saw that his back was facing her. He was wearing a thin robe, and his slender and strong legs were exposed from under the robe. Her body stiffened, but he saw him suddenly turn around. His robe was not fastened, so it was wide open. The man's fair chest was exposed. His skin was like jade, full of temptation. He looked at her indifferently, pursed his lips, and suddenly revealed an unnatural but seductive smile. Your Majesty, are you satisfied with what you see? Yunyan will serve Your Majesty tonight. Wei Weibai and the system. Feng Yunyan frowned and revealed a perfect expression that made people pity him. Your Majesty, am I not beautiful? Wei Weibai looked at the thick layer of rouge on his face and the blush on his cheeks. Then she looked at the peony hairpin by his ear. If this was on anyone else, it would be so ugly that even ghosts would cry. But he could still suppress the style and not be so shocking. Wei Weibai saw his cold expression and was worried that his favorability would decrease. She could only knead her conscience and aesthetics into pieces. Then, she said bitterly, Beautiful, you're the most beautiful. Feng Yunyan smiled and reached out to grab her, pulling her whole body into the bed. Then, Your Majesty, please treat Yunyan well. Wei Weibai reached out to the system in despair. Tongzi, I can't eat the big blush. The system silently turned around. It was too blinding. It didn't dare to look. Chapter 508. He clearly only wanted a little pity from her, but he didn't expect her reaction to be so big. He didn't know how to continue. Wei Wei Bai was afraid that he wouldn't believe her, so she suddenly turned over and got off the bed. Feng Yunyan got up, but saw that she had hurried back. She stepped on the gauze curtain and fell onto the bed. He immediately reached out to help her. But halfway through, he immediately frowned and retracted his hand. He only had disgust for her. How could she affect his emotions? Wei Wei Bai didn't see his actions. She looked up and stuffed a token into his hand. Take it. Whoever bullies you will die. Feng Yunyan was stunned for a moment before he saw the token in his hand clearly. It was a golden token with the words heaven. His fingers trembled. Even someone as gloomy as him almost revealed his true emotions. This was the Emperor's token. Act first and report later, command the Imperial Army and freely enter and leave the palace. It was as if the Emperor himself was here. This token had the same effect as the Imperial Jade Seal. Feng Yunyan held the token tightly. This was the power he had always wanted. He had thought about it day and night. He released the token and said gently, "Your Majesty, this is a very important thing. How can you give it to me? Take it back." Wei Wei Bai crossed her hands behind her head and raised her eyebrows. Her eyes were full of wanton brilliance. "I said I'll give it to you. We haven't even held the wedding ceremony yet. Why are you nagging like my husband?" Feng Yunyan pursed his lips, but still tried to probe. "Your Majesty, this is too precious." Wei Wei Bai turned her head impatiently. "All right, I won't give it to you if it's not precious. If you feel uneasy taking it, give me something to compensate." Feng Yunyan's eyes looked warm, but incomparably indifferent. "Your Majesty, what do you need me to do?" Wei Wei Bai tilted her head and looked at him. "Give me a smile." Feng Yunyan didn't understand. "Huh?" Wei Wei Bai revealed a big smile. "Just like that, give me a smile." Feng Yunyan was confused. Just like that? He tried to show a faint smile, elegant and warm. It was indescribably affectionate. Wei Wei Bai shook her head. "No, be happier." Feng Yunyan hesitated, then tried to smile brighter. Wei Wei Bai sighed. "Really, you don't even know how to smile." After saying that, she pounced on him and reached out to scratch his armpits. Feng Yunyan wasn't paying attention for a moment and let her succeed. He couldn't help but laugh. His brows relaxed and his smile brightened. The gloominess in his eyes dispersed. Only then did Bai Wei Wei let him go. She reached out to support his face and said with relief, "That's right, my man needs to be so happy." Feng Yunyan had never laughed so wantonly before. He pursed his lips and his breathing became disorderly. His heart began to beat faster. Yunyan was silent for a moment before revealing a smile. This smile was not as bright as before, but it slowly bloomed. His originally gentle and delicate face suddenly became elegant and noble. It was clearly the same face, but it was incomparably vivid and bright. Wei Wei Bai was confused as she stared at him in a daze. Feng Yunyan calmly lowered his head. His breath blew on her face. "Then I'll thank your Majesty. I'll accept this gift." Wei Wei Bai's face turned red. She turned her head in a panic, but she felt a bit scared, so she pretended not to care. "What are you thanking me for? My man doesn't need to say thanks. All right, go to sleep." She buys. After she finished speaking, she pulled the blanket over and turned her back to him. "I know you're not ready, so I won't touch you. We'll talk about it after we get married." Feng Yunyan looked at her beautiful back and couldn't help smiling. Who would have thought that this decisive woman would be so pure? Ding, the male lead's affection has increased to 0. Suddenly, he realized in hindsight that he had been smiling too much. Feng Yunyan's eyes gradually turned cold and the smile on his face became a bit strange. He looked down at the token in his hand. Wasn't this better? He could use her to get what he wanted. There would be a day when he could stand at the highest point. "Go to sleep." Wei Wei Bai's words suddenly interrupted his gloomy thoughts. Feng Yunyan saw her turn around and reached out to pull most of the blanket over to his side. His heart didn't know why, but it warmed up. Ding, the male lead's affection has increased to 5. How about if he succeeds in the future, he won't kill her? Transmigration system, male god, come here. Transmigration system, male god, come here. // transmigration system, male god, come here. The download address is at https://www. Sashu.com. Transmigration system, male god, come here. To make it easier for you to read next time, you can click the button at the bottom to record this reading. You can see it when you open the bookshelf next time. If you like Transmigration system, male god, come here. Chapter 509. Wei Wei Bai was relieved when she heard that the favorability was no longer negative. She could get favorability by just giving the token. It was so relaxing to not have to die. Wei Wei Bai suddenly thought of something and knocked on the system. Are there no side quests in this world? The system said, not yet. Wei Wei Bai thought about how she almost ran naked on Earth in the last world. She still had a lingering fear. Can I not accept the side quests? The punishment of the side quests was getting more and more insane. The system was silent. Wei Wei Bai said, are side quests forced to be bound and can't be rejected? The system was considering whether to tell the truth. After all, the truth would damage its heroic and shining image. In the end, it hesitated. I told you not to laugh. Wei Wei Bai said, I'm such a good person, why would I laugh at others? The system was relieved. The side quests can be rejected at the beginning. But when I landed, there was a small problem. Wei Wei Bai heard the system's story for the first time. She was very supportive, and then, the system said, then I accidentally stepped on air and landed face first. Some basic functions were broken, including the side quests reject button. Wei Wei Bai said, face first, you're so stupid. Haha, did you become a pancake face? The pancake face system was speechless. What happened to not laughing at others? Su Tong, our friendship is over. Goodbye. When Feng Yunyan woke up, there was no one beside him. He heard voices. It was Wei Wei Bai talking to the servant. Ask the imperial physician to come here once a day. The palace is in chaos recently, ask more people to come and serve me. The servant bowed his head respectfully and said, yes, your majesty. Wei Wei Bai said again, if the royal concubine wants to go out, send more people to protect him. My imperial guards are at his disposal. The servant was shocked. Feng Yunyan looked sideways and saw the servant changing her clothes. Her exquisite back view was so beautiful under the morning light that it made people hold their breath. 2 attendants slowly helped her put on the wide black robe that represented the emperor. She said indifferently, also, if the high priest wants to enter the palace in the future, chase her out. I want everyone to know that it's time for the high priest to give up her position. The attendant was terrified. But this, Wei Wei Bai's voice became cold and indifferent. Whoever dares to enter the palace, Zhen will chop that person. The waiter immediately knelt down, not daring to say another word. Feng Yunyan stared at her with a deep gaze. He turned her around and immediately closed his eyes, pretending to be asleep. Before long, he heard the sound of footsteps approaching the bed. Did she notice that he was awake? Feng Yunyan did not dare to move. In the next moment, a soft kiss gently fell on his lips. The kiss was quiet and restrained. There was not the slightest hint of blasphemy. Soon the kiss faded away. Feng Yunyan felt a flash of disappointment and frustration in his heart. Then he heard Wei Wei Bai's voice. Good morning, kiss. With that, she walked away. Feng Yunyan heard her instructing others as she went out. Let the imperial concubine have a good rest. No one is to disturb him. Feng Yunyan opened his eyes. He finally frowned. His expression became complicated. Did she really like him? Feng Yunyan had never dared to truly believe her feelings. The environment he lived in destined him to have a suspicious personality. Feng Yunyan could not help but reach out and gently touch his lips, as if there was still some warmth left. But soon, the coldness in his heart took over again. He did not need this. He took out the token that represented the emperor from his bosom. Finally, he smiled happily. This was what he wanted. The download address is at https://www. Sashu. Chapter 5:10. Suddenly, the palace became noisy. A cold light flashed through Feng Yunyan's eyes. The attendants couldn't stop a group of people from entering. I want to see which 1,000-year-old vixen has bewitched His Majesty's eyes. A group of men with makeup and flowers on their heads rushed in. They were either as beautiful as peonies or as delicate as lilies. Suddenly, the entire palace was bustling with activity. Feng Yunyan stood up, indifferent and cold. He looked coldly at this group of men with different looks and couldn't help but snort coldly in his heart. Wei Weibai really had good luck with women. The men saw Feng Yunyan sitting on the bed, his black hair draped over his shoulders. He didn't wear any makeup, but he looked calm and elegant. He looked at them without any expression. It was as if he was looking at a group of dead people. One of the men said fiercely, "Were you the one who instigated His Majesty to send us out of the palace?" Feng Yunyan didn't answer. He just stood up casually, took the robe beside him, and elegantly put it on. When he had his back to the group of men, he revealed a cold smile. Didn't Wei Weibai say that she could send a harem for him, as long as it was a pair? He really didn't believe that she could really do that. If these men were all killed, then could she still be so calm? Feng Yunyan rationally knew that he should endure and pretend to be kind. He should even generously persuade Wei Weibai. Tell her not to send a harem. But he didn't know why, when he thought that this woman would be so good to others. Even if it was fake, the jealousy in his heart couldn't help but appear. Feng Yunyan even knew that this wasn't because he liked Wei Weibai, but because he was extremely selfish. As long as he received a little friendly treatment, he couldn't help but want to monopolize it. Even if he didn't like Wei Weibai, he wouldn't allow her to be good to others after being good to him. A man couldn't stand Feng Yunyan's contempt. He hurried over to Feng Yunyan and reached out to give him a slap. "Bitch, did you think that you would be favored by Her Majesty just because you climbed into her bed?" Feng Yunyan easily grabbed the man's hand and twisted it. The man screamed and fell to the ground. He smiled at the group of men and suddenly asked, "Does His Majesty visit you often?" The men's sore spots were poked, and a few of them burst into tears. "His Majesty didn't come to the harem at all. How could he visit us?" Feng Yunyan was surprised. He did not expect that Wei Weibai had never visited anyone before. A faint joy rose in his heart. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 10. Feng Yunyan laughed. Suddenly, his eyes turned sharp and sinister as he looked at all the men. Then, he took out the token and said to the attendant beside him, "Bring me 50 imperial guards." The attendant knelt down in fear and trepidation. The 50 soldiers quickly arrived outside the palace. They were all wearing excellent armor and emitting killing intent. They had all fought with Wei Weibai in the flames of war and were absolutely loyal to Wei Weibai. Feng Yunyan held the token with a calm and gentle expression, but his eyes were as sharp as knives. He didn't look like a man at all. His voice sounded so ruthless and merciless in the bedroom. "Seeing the token is like seeing Her Majesty. I order you to flog these men to death." He wanted to test her bottom line step by step. He wanted to wash her harem with blood. Was she still willing to like him? When Wei Weibai heard the sound of her favorability increasing, she was bored watching the people below arguing. "Your Majesty, you sent all the men in the harem out. How can they get married?" Wei Weibai yawned. "You all have high positions and power. How can your sons not get married?" "Fish. You can see it next time you open the bookshelf. If you like." Chapter 5:11. The ministers were all shocked. "Your Majesty, a good man doesn't marry 2 women. They are your men for a day and will be for life." "Wei Weibai, I have never touched them. Don't try to take advantage of my life, okay?" The minister was very sad. How can my son marry in the future? Who dares to marry your majesty's woman? Wei Bai, when the time comes, I will put up a notice saying that whoever marries these men will get an official position. I guarantee that your house will be as lively as a market. After disbanding the harem, her favorability increased. Now, she wanted to throw the men she had never seen before out of the palace. The minister was agitated again. An official position is not a game. Chirp chirp chirp. Gurgle gurgle gurgle. Gurgle gurgle gurgle. Wei Bai covered her ears helplessly. The female officials in the imperial court quarreled like animals at a gathering. Suddenly, a few servants ran in panic and knelt down. Your Majesty, the imperial concubine, he has beaten all the men in the harem to death. Wei Bai stood up immediately. What? The female officials in the imperial court also fell silent. After a short silence, they suddenly exploded. What happened to my son? Say that again? They were all beaten to death. Who gave him such power? Kill him to avenge my son. Most of the men in the harem were the sons of court officials. So when they heard that their sons were dead, a few of them fainted on the spot. Wei Bai hurriedly ran to the harem and saw the bedroom from afar. Under the red tiles and white walls, Feng Yunyan was wearing a white robe and had an elegant and gentle demeanor. When he looked up and saw Wei Bai walking over, a smile appeared on his handsome face. Only his eyes were as dark as ink and terrifyingly cold. Beneath his feet was a pool of dirty blood. The imperial guards had beaten everyone to death and were cleaning up the corpses. Feng Yunyan stood in front of the corpses and looked at them indifferently. Wei Bai felt her legs turning to jelly. She said to the system, "Why do I feel like the target this time is a little cruel? What happened to the male lead being weak and helpless in a world of female supremacy?" The system said, "The system crashed face first, goodbye." Wei Bai, ? The system said, "The system is sleeping with its face down, goodbye." Wei Bai, "This hypocritical system, I just laughed at it a little, and it actually went on strike." Feng Yunyan looked at Wei Bai calmly, as if waiting for her to react. The ministers who followed them saw their son die so miserably. Immediately, someone snatched a knife from the imperial guard and furiously slashed at Feng Yunyan. "Give me back my son's life." Feng Yunyan stood still and stared at Wei Bai with his dark eyes. Was she really angry? Suddenly, the knife flew out. It was Wei Bai who swung her sleeve. She wrapped her arms around his waist and pulled him into her embrace. Then she said to the ministers, "All right, you can all leave." The ministers said heartbreakingly, "Your Majesty, my son died so miserably, and you still protect this bitch?" Wei Bai looked at the furious ministers and pursed her lips. She was speechless for a moment. Feng Yunyan looked at her in silence. In his bottomless eyes, there was a dark calculation and a perturbed fragility. Suddenly she let go of his waist. He looked at her with disappointment. Was she giving up on him? But in the next moment, Wei Bai pulled out a knife from a soldier and blocked in front of Feng Yunyan. A hint of bloodthirsty coldness appeared on her beautiful face. "Enough, get out of the palace. These men are all offending my beloved concubine, that's why they were beaten to death. Death is not enough. Death is not enough." It was full of cold murderous intent. The ministers looked at Wei Bai with cold hearts. But she did not change her mind. Instead, she stabbed the knife into the brick. The knife flashed white. It illuminated the pale faces of the ministers. Chapter 5:12. Wei Bai put her hands behind her back expressionlessly. Her aura was awe-inspiring and her expression was cold. She was full of the dignity and aura of a superior. She was as beautiful as a peony and as cold as a blade. Today, these men in the harem who don't know what's good for them wanted to assassinate my beloved concubine. I ordered them to be beaten to death. It was a simple sentence. She protected Feng Yunyan and successfully shifted the anger of all the ministers onto herself. She didn't care at all. Come, send the ministers out of the palace. The imperial guards immediately ran over. Ignoring the ministers' cries and curses, they dragged them one by one and chased everyone away. The ministers were chased away. The corpses were cleaned up. Only the bloodstains were left. Wei Weibai saw that everyone had left and finally heaved a sigh of relief. She turned around and saw Feng Yunyan looking at her in a daze. He was a little absent-minded, and his eyes were much softer and gentler. Wei Weibai walked slowly in front of him with a cold expression. Do you know your mistake? Feng Yunyan was stunned for a moment before revealing a mocking smile. Of course I'm wrong. I killed everyone in your harem. Although she protected him, she also blamed him. Feng Yunyan didn't know why, but he felt a surge of anger in his heart. Wei Weibai frowned and reached out to hold his hand. No, if you want to kill someone, you have to tell me. I'll help you kill them. It's not good to do it yourself. They'll find you to vent their anger in the future. Feng Yunyan's reaction was a little slow. He obediently let her lead him. He couldn't seem to understand her words. He pursed his lips and asked in confusion, Aren't you going to ask me why I killed them? Wei Weibai said indifferently, Do I need a reason? If you're unhappy, then kill them. I'll take care of it for you. Feng Yunyan stopped in his tracks. His fingers were trembling so much that many words were stuck in his throat. Bitterness and excitement intertwined, causing his heart to shriek sharply. He had risked his life by testing the waters this time. If he killed all the men in her harem, she would be furious and angry. In the worst-case scenario, she would kill him to appease the ministers. The best-case scenario was that she would protect him, but he would still have to spend a lot of effort to explain and hide his intentions. But he didn't expect that she would bear all the blame. Then, he didn't need to explain. This even made Feng Yunyan a little scared. He felt like he was dreaming. How could someone protect him like this? And he didn't even need to compete and scheme. He finally couldn't help but ask, Aren't you afraid that I'll mess up your empire? Wei Weibai finally turned around. Her eyes were sharp and beautiful, and her body carried the intimidating aura of an emperor. Are you happy to mess up my empire? Was this a question? Feng Yunyan was actually a little nervous. Wei Weibai suddenly smiled. The coldness between her eyebrows hardened into tenderness, and her clear eyes were filled with sincerity. If it's messed up, then it's messed up. As long as you like it. Feng Yunyan felt like his heart was being crushed by these words. Wei Weibai's face was dyed with a few traces of red as she said, Messing up the empire and winning against you is also quite good. After saying this, she seemed a little embarrassed and turned around. Suddenly, her sleeve was pulled by someone. Then his voice sounded with a trace of hesitation. It didn't feel like he was scheming anymore. Instead, there was a trace of cautious relaxation. Your Majesty, I'm hungry. Wei Weibai immediately said, If you're hungry, let's go eat. After saying this, she excitedly pulled Feng Yunyan away. Feng Yunyan couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. It was gentle and beautiful, bringing with it the warmth of letting go of his heart's defenses. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 20. Transmigration system, male god, come here. 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 Chapter 5:13. Because of the incident of a man being flogged to death in the palace, all the court officials were kneeling outside the palace to ask for an explanation. Wei Weibai was indifferent. If you want to kneel, then kneel to death. She was holding a crab claw and was peeling crab meat for Feng Yunyan. When she came to this plain, it happened to be in the dead of winter. As a result, her subordinates brought a basket of hairy crabs from Lotus Lake. It was said that crabs in other places were best in August and September, but in Lotus Lake, they were best in winter. When she heard that Feng Yunyan liked to eat crabs, she excitedly peeled them for him. It was snowing outside the house. The woman in the house was peeling the crab meat with her slender fingers. The snowy light reflected on her, making her beautiful facial features soft and beautiful. Feng Yunyan looked at her. His eyes were deep, but under the dark eyes, there was confusion and uneasiness. Suddenly, a piece of crab meat was stuffed into his mouth. He was stunned, but saw her smile gently and say, "Is it good?" The crab meat had no taste in his mouth. Because of the poison test, he had lost his sense of taste. He would not find anything good to eat. But under her loving and gentle smile, he felt that the crab meat was sweet and soft. There was no taste in his tongue, but there was in his heart. Wei Weibai continued peeling the crab meat with her head down and chatted with the hypocrite system. "It's not that I want to criticize you, but if you're face down, then so be it. I don't mind if you're ugly." The system held back Cold War. "But if you're not face down, you're probably just as ugly, so there's no need to be sad." The system felt that it could not hold back anymore. It picked up an Italian cannon and blew this scumbag up. "You're ugly, but don't I have a beautiful face to compliment you? We're a match made in heaven. You're ugly with style and I'm beautiful with class." The system held down the hand that threw the bomb. The bomb was too expensive, so it could not bear to buy it. Even if it bought it, it could not afford to eat. "Wei Weibai, this plane is so easy. I only need to pamper Pet to get favorability points. I don't even need to risk my life." The system laughed strangely. "Hee, Wei Weibai, why do I have a bad feeling about this?" She was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, she heard Feng Yunyan's voice. "Your Majesty, the snow is cold and the wind is strong. Is it really okay that the ministers outside the palace are still kneeling?" His voice was calm, but there was a trace of hypocrisy in it. Wei Weibai placed all the peeled crab meat on the plate in front of him. "It doesn't matter if a few kneel to death. My throne was won with blood. If these people die, I'll just replace them." She was the emperor who had successfully rebelled and established a country. He was not afraid of the civil officials rebelling. She looked up, calm and confident. It was as if even an army of thousands would not be able to shake her. This kind of charm was simply breathtaking. Feng Yunyan felt his heart begin to feel uneasy again. He lowered his head. Little by little, he suppressed the restlessness in his heart. Asking too much for love would not end well. Bai Weiwei really did seem to like him now. How could he not know? But how long could the emperor's love last? Only power was eternal. His eyes returned to their cold indifference, but his expression became gentler. "I'm just worried about your Majesty." Wei Weibai's eyes lit up. Her confident calmness was swept away. Instead, she was jumping with joy. "You're worried about me? I feel so happy that I can kill a tiger." Feng Yunyan felt that he was full of schemes. Under her burning and sincere emotions, he was disgusted. He clenched his fingers and then curled his lips. His eyes were filled with a fake smile. "Your Majesty, the Emperor's token is in my hands. It's not legitimate. Please take it back." "Bai Weiwei, it's not legitimate? I'll immediately have someone draft an edict and let you go through the process. You'll be the head of the 4 concubines for 2 months. After that, I'll take you as my empress." The download address is at https://www. Sashu. Chapter 5:14. She didn't hesitate at all. Going through the process was also to protect him. Feng Yunyan only wanted a little thing every time, but she always gave him a mountain of benefits. This let her be the emperor for a few more months. She could probably empty the world for him. Feng Yunyan got the status he wanted and stepped into the center of power step by step. He thought he would be very happy. But looking at the woman in front of him who was completely unguarded against him, the feeling of loss in his heart became heavier. Was she really not afraid that after he took everything from her, he would betray her? Wei Weibai suddenly frowned. "This crab is getting cold, eat quickly, and warm some wine, don't let your stomach get cold." After that, she began to feed him with the crab meat in her chopsticks. Feng Yunyan was stunned for a moment, looking at her beautiful eyes full of expectation. He still opened his mouth and ate the food she gave him. In fact, he hated being fed by others. because it would make him feel ashamed that he was a pet. However, the way she fed him made him feel like he was being cherished and spoiled. The crab meat was a little cold, but his heart was warm. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 25. Wei Wei Bai smiled even more happily. It was good to be a loyal dog. This favorability rose just like that. There had never been a world where it was so easy. After eating and drinking a few cups of wine to warm his stomach, it was getting dark outside. The snow was getting heavier. Wei Wei Bai took advantage of the good atmosphere and knocked on the wine cup with her chopsticks, singing a few tuneless songs. I can't stop loving you. I still want to love you even after death. I love you like a mouse loves rice. Feng Yunyan was still listening at first, but the more he listened, the more he felt that it was bold and unreliable. Where did this licentious song come from? It was simply unbearable. He should have despised it, but he couldn't help but feel better when he saw her smile happily. Outside the bedroom, a servant suddenly came in cautiously and reported, Your Majesty, the High Priest is here. Wei Wei Bai drank some wine and was not drunk yet. Her face was flushed red, making her look even more gorgeous. She sneered, Oh, there's a distinguished guest. Invite her in. When Feng Yunyan heard this name, his eyes flashed with cold, killing intent. Leng Lianqing, dressed in red priest robes, walked in with a cold expression. She was extremely arrogant and bowed to Wei Wei Bai. Your Majesty, I'm here to seek justice for the ministers outside the palace. She was not afraid of Wei Wei Bai getting angry. The Leng family had a strong control over the imperial court. As long as Wei Wei Bai wanted to rule the country well, the Leng family would not be able to do anything. He could only lower his head to these civil officials first. However, after bending over and waiting for a long time, she did not hear Wei Wei Bai asking her to get up. The emperor didn't say anything, but she couldn't be impolite because of her status as a priestess. He could only maintain his bowing posture. He was bending so much that his spine was about to break. Finally, she heard Wei Wei Bai's calm voice. You may rise. Leng Lianqing heaved a sigh of relief. She got up and saw a familiar figure sitting beside Wei Wei Bai. He put his hand on the table. His clean and gentle face was cold as snow, and his eyes were dark to the point of being demonic. Isn't this the remnant of the previous dynasty? Leng Lianqing saw that it was an acquaintance and smiled confidently. Your Majesty, there are rumors outside the palace that a demon concubine has appeared by your side and used a bewitching spell on you to make you slaughter innocent subjects. Demon concubine. This name made Feng Yunyan's face turn even colder. He had killed so many people and stirred up the entire center of power. Saying that she was a demon concubine was still light. Leng Lianqing looked at Feng Yunyan with disdain. I was wondering who the demon concubine was, but I didn't expect it to be such a lowly thing. Chapter 5:15. Feng Yunyan gritted his teeth. The crazy anger in his heart was finally unable to be suppressed. Just as he was about to get up, a soft hand pressed down on the back of his hand. Feng Yunyan turned his head to look at her. However, he found that Wei Wei Bai's expression was even colder than his. She suddenly sneered, It seems that the high priest understands my beloved concubine quite well. Leng Lianqing said disdainfully, Feng Yunyan is a prince of the previous dynasty. He has always been scheming and has a vicious heart. I understand him the best. Wei Wei Bai was neither salty nor indifferent. Understand more. Leng Lianqing said, at a young age, he pushed his wet nurse into the lake and drowned her. At the age of 5, he wanted to kill his younger sister, Princess Feng Ling. Leng Lianqing coldly said one crime after another. Feng Yunyan felt as if his entire body was soaked in ice water. He was being slashed again and again with a knife. These crimes were all true. He was not afraid of others saying it, but would she hate him for being so vicious? When this thought came, he only felt like his heart was being twisted by a knife. Leng Lianqing continued, Later on, I educated him for several years before correcting his vicious methods. I didn't expect that he would actually do it again. As expected, there is no need to educate such a lowly person with a rotten heart. Killing him is the right thing to do. Feng Yunyan's face became even paler. He pursed his thin lips. The resentment in his eyes was so cold that it made people's hair stand on end. Are you done? Wei Wei Bai's clear voice sounded. Lung Lianqing said confidently, Your Majesty, I think. Wei Wei Bai was annoyed. Why are you so long-winded? We originally thought that you were going to die and let you say your last words. Are you done yet? When these words came out, Lung Lianqing was stunned. Feng Yunyan suddenly raised his eyes and looked at her in disbelief. Wei Wei Bai coldly curled her lips. Under the candlelight, the sharp anger on her face made her look as dazzling as fire. It's one thing for a despicable dog to bark nonstop, but it actually dares to point fingers at my people and wantonly insult them. Only then did Lung Lianqing notice the murderous intent in her eyes. Her heart tightened. Your Majesty, the people kneeling outside the palace are all your old subjects. I am also someone who supports you. Wei Wei Bai suddenly kicked him. The #1 martial arts skill in the world directly kicked the high priest a few times, and he fell to the wall and bounced to the ground. Lung Lianqing's internal organs were all injured, and she spat out mouthfuls of blood. Wei Wei Bai stood up and slowly walked in front of Lung Lianqing. If you didn't jump around, I would have let you live for another day or two. Lung Lianqing couldn't believe it. Your Majesty, do you want the world to fall into chaos? Wei Wei Bai sneered, so what if it's messed up? This emperor has the ability to seize the world once, so this emperor has the ability to seize it a second time. Who do you think you are? After saying this, she kicked again. Lung Lianqing's meridians were broken. She stretched out her fingers, and her fingertips were covered in black powder. A vicious look flashed through her eyes. Your Majesty, you actually dare to treat me like this, just for a remnant of the previous dynasty? Wei Wei Bai lifted her foot and stepped on her face, crushing it. That's right, this emperor did it for him. Are you jealous? Lung Lianqing screamed, and her fingers fiercely grabbed at Jiunshu's ankle. But before her fingers could touch Wei Wei Bai, a poisonous needle had already pierced into her arm. She immediately lost all her strength. Wei Wei Bai was pulled back by a pair of hands, and she fell into a warm embrace. Your Majesty! Feng Yunyan's voice was trembling. She had almost been poisoned. Thinking of the scene just now, Feng Yunyan still had lingering fears. Wei Wei Bai smiled at him. I'll kill this bitch-tongued and venomous retard first, then we can continue drinking. Feng Yunyan looked at her with a complicated expression. Don't you mind what happened in my past? Murdering the wet nurse, poisoning Feng Ling, and many servants and officials were all killed by him. His hands were covered in blood. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows and couldn't help but tease him. I was happy when you tried to assassinate me. At that time, I was thinking about why you were so good-looking, so I was willing to cut you a few more times. Chapter 5:16. Feng Yunyan thought of their beginning. Bloody and hateful. But she said that she was very happy. Wei Wei Bai pressed down on his fingers. I like you like this. You're bad or not? Feng Yunyan's eyelashes trembled even more. The defenses in his heart were broken again and again. This woman, did she know what she was saying? He would believe this kind of words. Your Majesty, can you go out? Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment before nodding and saying, I'll go out. You can torture him to vent your anger. It'll be fine even if you cut his body into 10,000 pieces. Feng Yunyan lowered his eyes and his voice softened. When she walked out, she kicked Lung Lianqing a few more times, shattering the bones in her arms and legs. To prevent her from hurting Feng Yunyan. How could Feng Yunyan not know what she was thinking? He watched her trust as she walked out. His eyes couldn't help but soften. No one had ever spoiled him to this extent. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 30. Lung Lianqing's mouth was full of blood. She looked at Feng Yunyan in horror and disgust. What kind of poison did you use on Her Majesty? She actually listens to you. Feng Yunyan didn't say anything. He just walked to the candle and flicked the wick, making the candle light a bit brighter. The flickering candlelight made the eerie expression on his face even more obvious. His face was clearly gentle and pretty, but it was twisted and ferocious like a devil. Lung Lianqing saw him like this and was terrified to the extreme. She laughed loudly. Doesn't Wei Wei Bai dislike you when she sees you like this? You really are an ugly monster. Feng Yunyan walked in front of her and reached out. A golden needle pierced into her flesh. Wasn't this monster taught by you? Lung Lianqing trembled. You're just my dog. How dare you treat me like this? Feng Yunyan smiled and the resentment on his face melted. Unexpectedly, it became clear and gentle. Power is really a good thing. In the past, you made me live like a dog, but now I can torture you to death. After Feng Yunyan finished speaking, his expression became gentle. Furthermore, even if I'm as ugly as a monster, His Majesty still loves me. This is something that you can't be jealous of. All of Wei Wei Bai's actions. His heavy vigilance was crushed bit by bit. He was ugly, he was bad, he was evil. She still defended him. The sense of security of being loved so recklessly was like poison. Let him sink and fall. The feeling of being loved was so wonderful. Feng Yunyan smiled calmly and elegantly. Although I'm happy to torture you, I want to get out of here as soon as possible and drink with her. After saying that, he watched as Lung Lianqing began to melt. This golden poison could completely melt a person. A heart-wrenching scream came from the palace, but it soon returned to silence. Feng Yunyan walked out. Outside the palace, white snow fell. The woman standing at the door had her back to him. Her long hair was draped over her shoulders, and her slender back was straight and elegant. She seemed to have sensed something and turned around. Do you feel better? Wei Wei Bai asked. Feng Yunyan thought that she would ask about Lung Lianqing's condition. But her eyes were filled with his shadow, as if his mood was much more important than a human life. Feng Yunyan's eyes became a little moist. When I was young, my nanny reported that my blood could cure Feng Ling to claim credit. He walked forward step by step. She betrayed me, so I killed her. Feng Ling humiliated me and used me like a dog. I hated her, so I wanted to kill her. Lung Lianqing tortured me and made me beg for death. She is the person I hate the most. These words were clearly hidden in his heart and could not be said. But today, seeing her gentle and loving eyes, he finally collapsed. He finally collapsed, and all of his grievances and pain poured out wantonly. Finally, he walked in front of her. Will you abandon me and betray me in the future? Wei Wei Bai sighed. Then she reached out and hugged him tightly. She raised her head and kissed him. This kiss was long and cherished. Then her voice was softer than snow. Even if I betray this world, I will not let you down. Feng Yunyan was stunned for a long time. His heart was like a drum, shattering his last line of defense. He finally gave up struggling. He hugged her back and buried his face in her shoulder. Your Majesty, I believe you. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 35. 40, 45. Chapter 517. After a few of the ministers kneeled to death outside the palace. Feng Yunyan couldn't bear to watch anymore. Of course, he didn't sympathize with them, nor did he feel guilty at all. His nature was dark and selfish, and he never expected others to live well. However, the civil officials ruled the country, and the new dynasty needed to recuperate. These ministers were still useful. The newly promoted newcomers were only motivated, but they still lacked experience. At the very least, they needed to train for a period of time before they could let this group of pedantic and overbearing old ministers die. From the beginning, Feng Yunyan wanted to seize power and usurp the throne, but now he was sincerely thinking for her. This journey in his heart was strange and magical to him. He looked at Wei Wei Bai, who was half lying on the bed, holding a miscellaneous book and eating melon seeds, and his eyes softened. Your Majesty, the ministers outside the palace. Wei Wei Bai was engrossed in reading the novel. She didn't even think about it. If they want to kneel, then let them kneel. The group of chattering female officials outside were all filled with righteous indignation and wanted her to kill Feng Yunyan. It was no exaggeration to say that Feng Yunyan was her life. Even if she made the group of people outside kneel to death, they couldn't touch a single hair on Feng Yunyan's head. Feng Yunyan sighed, turned around, and walked in front of her. He called out softly, "Your Majesty, this country still needs to be governed by civil officials. The foundation of the new dynasty is not stable, so it needs to be pacified." Wei Weibai looked up and saw the gentle face of the man in front of her. He had lost that trace of gloominess. But there was more gentleness and sincerity. She held the melon seeds in her hand and looked at him blankly. Then she looked away and said somewhat woodenly, "Who asked them to kill you? What's the point of this country if you die?" Feng Yunyan saw that she was hiding something and lowered her head. She said this with incomparable shyness. But it didn't make him feel that this woman wasn't heroic enough. On the contrary, it made him even more at a loss. What did he do to make her think so highly of him? Feng Yunyan sat beside the bed and leaned over to rest his head on her shoulder. He had never felt so happy before. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 50. Wei Weibai, this skyrocketing favorability is so easy to shed tears of joy. Feng Yunyan suddenly said, "Since your Majesty cares for me, then I will let those ministers go home. After all, kneeling for too long is not good for your Majesty's reputation." Wei Weibai smiled and said, "Does Yunyan have any good ideas?" Feng Yunyan also smiled, and his eyes turned vicious. "They are kneeling outside the palace to force His Majesty. They are not good people. Isn't this ruining His Majesty's reputation?" He looked coldly at the door. "It's just the death of a few people, and you dare to threaten the emperor like this? A bunch of untrained dogs. If it weren't for the fact that they were still useful, I would have plenty of schemes to destroy their families." After Feng Yunyan finished speaking, he suddenly stopped talking. He glanced at Wei Weibai with some hesitation. These words were not gentle enough for a man, and were too vicious. Would she be disgusted? However, the woman in front of him did not feel disgusted at all, and the smile on her face remained. She said with a smile, "I am very happy to see that you are worried about me." Feng Yunyan's heart relaxed, and the corners of his mouth curled up, and a happy smile appeared. Bai Weiwei lazily propped up her head with her hand. "Okay, then you deal with the group of ministers outside the palace. Take my token, seal, blank imperial edict, and so on. I support you." She did not hesitate to give this trust. Feng Yunyan's body trembled, and his heart was filled with gratitude. He could take these and usurp the throne. But she casually gave them to him. Is this how it feels to be loved by someone? Chapter 518. Feng Yunyan turned to look at her. Her side profile was fair and delicate, and her black hair fell to her ears. Her entire person was less aggressive and gorgeous. But there was a trace of gentleness and beauty. He suddenly couldn't help but whisper, "Your Majesty?" Wei Weibai was still thinking about the miscellaneous books in her hands. The stories inside were incomparably interesting. Suddenly, the books in her hands were taken away. Then, a hand pressed down on her shoulder, followed by Feng Yunyan's handsome face approaching. His eyebrows were moving and gentle, and his eyes were incomparably clear. A lingering kiss fell on her lips. Her breath was fresh and beautiful, making him fall for it. Feng Yunyan half closed his eyes and stared intently at her. Her slightly trembling eyelashes and the joy that flashed in her eyes were all captured by him. It was so good that there was actually someone in this world who was willing to love him. Feng Yunyan discovered that happiness was actually so simple. Even the power that he yearned for could no longer move him. Outside the palace, a few more ministers fainted. Although when they were kneeling, there were cushions, people holding umbrellas, serving them, and handing them water and food. They could even rest when they were tired. But the civil officials were used to living like princes, so how could they stand kneeling in the snow for so long? So, more people couldn't stand it and fell ill. Suddenly, the palace doors opened. The eyes of those ministers who were still insisting on kneeling lit up. Finally, the emperor couldn't stand the pressure and came to give in to them. Once the emperor gave in, they would be able to gain more power. Inside the palace, someone came in the emperor's sedan. A large number of attendants followed behind. The sedan stopped in front of the ministers. On the sedan, the man placed one hand on the chair, and his dark eyes carried a trace of gloominess. Clearly, his face was handsome like flowing water and white clouds. But it made people feel a chill down their backs, and they were stunned by the murderous aura in his eyes. Ministers, you all really have a lot of free time. His Majesty is busy with some heavy matters. It's fine if you don't help, but come here to force him to abdicate. Feng Yunyan's gentleness was all for Wei Wei Bai. He looked at the people in front of him who would only cause trouble for Wei Wei Bai. The murderous intent in his heart could not be stopped. One of the leading ministers said, "You evil concubine, you killed my son. I will make sure you die a horrible death. Where is His Majesty? How can you sit in His Majesty's sedan chair?" Feng Yunyan raised his eyebrows, and his eyes were filled with coldness. She must have become muddle-headed from kneeling. Men beat her to death. Only by killing the leader would he be able to set an example for the rest. To put it bluntly, even if all the civil officials were to be beaten to death, Wei Wei Bai's iron-blooded army was enough to protect the country. He hoped that the imperial court would stabilize and allow a new batch of young civil officials to take over. That was why he allowed these old women to live for a few more days. However, if these women were not obedient, he would have to kill them. Because they refused to lower their heads while they were alive, they would only bring harm to Wei Wei Bai. Of course, they had to be eliminated. Feng Yunyan smiled coldly. In the snow, the leader's blood soon stained the ground. The people in the imperial court were all dirty. The remaining civil officials began to tremble. There was no one who was not afraid of death. If they were not afraid of death, how could they surrender to Wei Wei Bai? Let her rebel successfully. Feng Yunyan raised his chin and revealed a mocking sneer. All right, kneel and listen to the imperial edict. The imperial edict was written by him, and he used the jade seal to seal it. Wei Wei Bai only said lightly, "You do it, I believe you." How could she provoke his heart like this? When Feng Yunyan thought of her, the dirty palace in the past felt as beautiful as a paradise. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 55. The imperial edict listed the crimes of the men in the harem one by one. All the men killed each other in the harem. Those who were not favored because of power, they framed each other. Not many of them had clean hands. Chapter 5:19. Feng Yunyan knew these secrets too well. This was something that happened before Wei Wei Bai got close to the harem. If Wei Wei Bai got close to the harem, those people would fight even more for power. After the imperial edict was read, Feng Yunyan said, "These are your good sons. They harmed the innocent people of the harem and casually killed the servants. It is a matter of course for me to kill them with a rod." Of course, the ministers were not convinced by this judgment. But Feng Yunyan did not need them to be convinced. Because this imperial edict was for the people outside the palace to see, for the people to see. As long as Wei Wei Bai's image as the emperor was not damaged, and she did not become an incapable ruler because she spoiled him, then let this group of old women jump around. They could not hurt her. Since he was born, he did not know how many schemes and tricks he had done and how many people he had killed. So, he saw these things even more clearly than Wei Wei Bai. After doing all this, Feng Yunyan said coldly, "If you continue to kneel and refuse to leave, then I will send you on your way." The ministers looked at their colleagues who had died in the snow. Their hearts were cold. Finally, some of them could not take it anymore. After kneeling and saluting, they were helped away by the servants. One person left, 2 people left. In the end, the remaining few could not walk anymore. They were all thrown onto the main road by Feng Yunyan. His methods were ruthless and swift. As a man, he never admitted defeat. When Feng Yunyan returned to the bedroom, He saw Wei Wei by frowning as she flipped through the memorials. When she saw him, her eyes lit up. She rushed in front of him and stuffed a stack of memorials into his hands. Feng Yunyan held the memorials in his hand. They were not heavy, but they made him feel heavy. Your Majesty, this? Wei Wei Bai pulled out all the government affairs that needed to be dealt with. At the same time, he placed his jade seal and other things in a conspicuous position. You can deal with it in the future. I'm having a headache over this. Oh right, I've thrown away all the memorials scolding you. Don't look at them. Feng Yunyan said somewhat helplessly, but this is the Emperor's right, not mine. Wei Wei Bai picked up the miscellaneous books again and read them with great interest. She had no interest in governing the country at all. It wasn't easy for him to get to a plane where he could relax a little. She couldn't wait to take a vacation every day. Husband and wife are one. What's mine is yours. Good luck. Feng Yunyan thought that she was only temporarily letting go of the power to let him deal with the people outside the palace. He didn't expect that she would actually let him manage the entire imperial court. Your Majesty, the ministers have all returned home. I also had people spread the evil deeds of those men who were beaten to death. I won't let your wisdom be tarnished. Wei Wei Bai looked up and smiled brightly. I knew you were the smartest. You can even do such a difficult thing. Feng Yunyan was praised by her until the tips of his ears turned red. He looked away embarrassedly. Your Majesty, if you're tired, then I'll help you deal with the government affairs. She trusted him so much. How could he betray her trust? Even if he had to turn into a knife, he had to get rid of all the obstacles in the imperial court for her. He had to let her become a real emperor whose name would go down in history. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 60. Wei Wei Bai didn't know about Feng Yunyan's ambition at all. She happily agreed. Then the following days would be to eat and wait for death and gain favorability. What a happy day. Let the happiness come more fiercely. The system said. Be careful of being whipped to death by the violent happiness. Wei Wei Bai said, if it's happiness, then whip me. Whip me. The system was speechless. Other people's hosts were all wise and powerful, killing in all directions. Why was its host so shameless? Furthermore, it was so poor. The system sighed. It would have been better if it didn't fall face first. It was really a slip that led to everlasting regret. The is it? https://m/sashu.com/the Chapter 520. In the following days, Wei Wei Bai flirted with Yunyan, eating and waiting for death, flirting with Yunyan. Half a month passed. Her favorability towards him had also increased to 70. At this rate, she would definitely have a good impression of him in less than 4 months. After Feng Yunyan finished dealing with government affairs, he saw Wei Wei Bai lying on the chair beside him, asleep. He told her to rest. But she insisted on waiting for him. Feng Yunyan picked her up. Her soft body made him feel warm and fragrant. During this period of time, he held great power in his hands and could summon wind and rain in the imperial court. He promoted capable new officials and reformed some corrupt policies. Recently, he had also started to develop agriculture and water conservancy, as well as plans to reduce tax burdens. At first, he wanted to use his power to do whatever he wanted, but now, he only wanted to protect this new dynasty. He had to protect her country. He put her on the bed, but Wei Wei Bai suddenly woke up. She rubbed her eyes. It's dark? Feng Yunyan reached out and gently massaged her scalp. Yes, it's late. Go to sleep. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes comfortably. I need to go out tonight? Feng Yunyan paused. Where are you going? Wei Wei Bai got up and yawned. To seek justice for you? Feng Yunyan was stunned. To seek justice? Soon he found out what she meant by seeking justice. Wei Wei Bai wore black night clothes and rode a horse valiantly, followed by the murderous imperial guards. Feng Yunyan sat behind her, hugged her waist, and followed her to the Lung family. Lung Lianxing was dead, and the Lung family had made a big fuss. They were all chased out by Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai waved her whip and said, Lung Lianqing bullied you. None of these Lung family members are good people. I set a net for half a month and finally caught all of them. Feng Yunyan had a complicated expression as he looked at the Lung family. He thought of the humiliation of the past. He felt a chill in his heart, and a bloodthirsty impulse surged up. The Lung family had deep roots and power, so he did not dare to touch them for the time being. Who would have thought? Wei Wei Bai waved her hand. Go in. Kill as many as you see them. The Imperial Guards obeyed. They rushed in and started slaughtering the Lung family. Bai Wei Wei sensed the stiff body of the man behind her. She put her hand on her hip and grasped his fingers. Don't be afraid. I know you're in pain. I've heard of those humiliating acts before. Just thinking about it makes me want to tear those bitches apart. Feng Yunyan's voice was a little choked. If the Lung family falls, it will cause a lot of problems. Wei Wei Bai, no matter how many problems there are, as long as you're here, it won't be a problem. Feng Yunyan hugged her tightly and buried his face in her back. He suddenly said softly, I hate them. I hate those princesses, I hate those princes, and I hate the Lung family who oppressed and humiliated me. Lung Lianqing's methods were the most vicious. He had even abused him in every possible way. But what was even more vicious were his brothers and sisters, his mother who sat on the throne. She ignored him just like that, leaving him with no way to ask for help. And Feng Ling was the person he hated to the core. Because the better she was, the more miserable he would be. Her health was maintained by taking his blood. He wouldn't let any of these people go. He thought that he would have to spend many years taking revenge. However, there was a person who came into his life like a savior. Wei Wei Bai's tender voice sounded in his ear. It's okay. I'll help you take revenge in the future. The Lung clan was set ablaze. Wei Wei Bai sat on the horse and didn't have time to care about anything else. Instead, she was trying her best to comfort Feng Yunyan, who was hugging her weakly. Feng Yunyan hugged her even tighter. Your Majesty, let's go to the forest. There was a forest not far away. Wei Wei Bai didn't think much of it and rode in. But just as they entered the forest, Feng Yunyan hugged her and got off the horse. Wei Wei Bai wasn't prepared and was pressed in front of a tree. Her confused question was swallowed up by his intense kiss. This kiss was urgent and lingering. His aura wrapped around her, as domineering as a chain. Wei Wei Bai was dizzy from his kiss. The two kissed so intensely that their hot bodies were pressed against each other. Tiny beads of sweat appeared on their foreheads. This was the first time Feng Yunyan had the thought of completely taking a person for himself. She made him fall into the abyss and then into heaven. He was even afraid. What if she didn't want him in the future? He didn't even dare to think about it. He would go crazy. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 75. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.